continue on changing the world today. So I will be strict regarding to the minutes that we can speak. So let's begin with the first speaker, and this is the speaker from Poland. I'll give you the floor. After that is the speaker from Belarus. Here you are.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ladies, gentlemen, dear fellow parliamentarians. Of course, I am perfectly aware that we are facing different problems in different regions and countries. But if I am to be credible talking about the subject of this assembly, I need to speak about the issue that concerns my part of the world most, which today is the unlawful Russian aggression against Ukraine. But actually, it's not only my part of the world. One of the effects of this unlawful aggression is the food crisis that affects many countries on the African continent and elsewhere. It also creates a very dangerous precedent for those countries all over the globe which may be concerned about the potential threats for their sovereignty. Any discussion regarding peaceful coexistence, which is the topic of this debate, must be based on truth and facts if it's going to be anything more than a casual small talk. We've heard yesterday, the day before, and even probably we'll hear in a moment, claims that have nothing to do with the actual reality. So let me be clear. There is no crisis in Ukraine. There is no civil war going on there. This is, by the way, an extremely disgusting and bold lie. There are no two points of view, as the Russian delegates would like us to believe. There's just a barbaric aggression carried out by Russia. There are attacks on civilian infrastructure. There are rapings of women and children as means of war. Can you imagine what kind of monster rapes a child? Children are also being kidnapped, taken away from their parents and sent to Russia. Ladies and gentlemen, this is genocide. This is the exact definition of genocide. Our goal as parliamentarians should be restoring the rules-based order, upholding the international law, and bringing those responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity to justice. I encourage you all to work towards achieving those goals, because it's impossible to talk about peaceful coexistence without having that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your speech. So now I give the floor to Belarus.
Distinguished President, distinguished colleagues, the world is undergoing global changes. System of international challenges is distorted, existing local conflicts and crises are aggravating. Interstate relations are challenged and lack dialogue and mutually respectful cooperation. In this context, I would like to draw attention to the initiative of the President of the Republic of Belarus, Mr. Alexander Lukashenko, on the need for the global process in the spirit of San Francisco Conference. This process should result in a clear and transparent agreements on the rules of new world order that will ensure security guarantees for all members. Belarus has always been a donor of regional security. Under the UN auspices and other international organizations, a number of high-level events of international security issues have been held in Belarus. Belarus continues to conduct a peaceful foreign policy. We know the value of peace like no one else. Every third Belarusian died during the Second World War. On the issue of resolving the conflict in Ukraine, our country has consistently called on the parties concerned to implement the Minsk agreements. The President of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, personally initiated contacts between Russia and Ukraine in order to resolve the situation. 3 rounds of negotiations were organized on the territory of Belarus. The Belarusian side provided all conditions. Belarusian side has made every effort to help Ukrainian refugees. Since February 22, Belarus accepted more than 65,000 Ukrainians. and all necessary conditions have been created. The organizations of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, assistance to refugees, all this corresponds to the unifying and peace-loving initiatives that the Republic of Belarus has been promoting lately. Belarus calls on all those interested in to find solutions to resolve the conflict, to intensify political and diplomatic efforts in order to achieve peace as soon as possible. Mr. President, the current turbulence in the international relations poses serious challenges to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Agenda. The UN estimates that the progress of Belarus in implementing the agenda is almost 80%. In 2022, Belarus ranked 34 in the Sustainable Development Goals. Unfortunately, the efforts of Belarus to implement the SDGs today are largely offset by the growing process of interstate confrontation. The unwillingness of the group of Western states to respect the sovereign development choices of other nations and to have the honest dialogue on regional security issues. The situation is aggravated primarily by the Western states' use of unilateral coercive measures that contradict the UN Charter, undermine the rights of hundreds of thousands of millions of people. In this context, we urge the Interparliamentary Union and parliamentaries to stand in solidarity against the illegal sanctions policy of the West. Over the past years, Belarus has been facing systemic discriminations against Belarusian athletes in the international arena, which is based only on political motivations. Decisions to deprive Belarusian athletes of membership in international federations and the right to participate in international competitions not only flagrantly violate the Olympic Charter, but also a number of international human rights treaties, including Universal Declaration of Human Rights, International Convention on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Convention of Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. Belarus urges the Interparliamentary Union to call upon the international Olympic movement to stop the Western politicians' intervention into sports and their discriminatory isolationist policy. Mr. President, today, in order to observe the constitutional rights and freedoms of citizens, a system of measures is aimed at ensuring equality and full participation in society of all citizens, regardless of gender, age, physical characteristics, etc. The country has clearly built legislation that has consolidated the century-old traditions in peaceful good neighborhood. Belarus is taking concrete steps to ensure gender parity in various spheres of society. Belarusian parliament focuses on the inclusion of children with disabilities into the society. The Consultative Council of Social Adaptation and the Creation of Children with Mental and Physical Disabilities works under leadership of Her Excellency Ms. Natalia Kochanova, based on education institutions and health facilities. The issues of assistance to children with autism in the health system, the diagnosis of autism disorders are analyzed. Belarus is a country of social-oriented economy, and this is most reliable guarantee of justice and protection for all categories of society, including the most vulnerable groups of population. Thank you for your attention.
I will now give the floor to Ria. And afterwards, Kazakhstan.
President of the IPU Assembly and fellow parliamentarians, when intolerance affects any nation, it impacts every nation and threatens and disrupts peaceful coexistence. Our parliaments remain pivotal in achieving the goal of national and global peace, understanding, and mutual respect. Consistent commitment towards eradicating the culture of intolerance will be the catalyst towards a more peaceful world. Guyana is multi-ethnic, culturally and religiously diverse, and government's policy promotes unity and celebrates this diversity. We are cognizant that the strength of our democracy relies on parliamentary ethos, which rests on a strong, progressive, constitutional foundation. Guyana's constitution espouses the protection of fundamental human rights of all the people of Guyana. In 2003, the constitution was amended, creating 5 rights commissions: the Human Rights, Ethnic Relations, Women and Gender Equality, Rights of the Child, and Indigenous People Commissions, with the intention of curbing intolerance and inequality. The Parliament of Guyana adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 2007, ensuring that all legislation crafted reflects equal opportunity and is gender neutral. Guyana has ratified 11 human rights treaties and incorporated these responsibilities, including education, prevention of gender-based violence, child protection, employment, social security, and labor, into national legislation. Violence of any kind, and particularly against women, stems from deeply rooted intolerance, and Guyana is developing more expansive laws, offering wider umbrella of protection to family members. Our parliament has diverse ethnic and political representation, including rotational representation of multiple small parties. Women constitute 35% of the National Assembly. The Equal Rights Act, Chapter 3801, ensures equality for women in the workplace, and the Prevention of Discrimination Act 26 of 1997 prohibits discrimination in employment and promotes equal remuneration for men and women in employment who perform work of equal value. There are legislated national holidays of major religions and ethnic groups, reflecting our religious and cultural harmony. For true inclusion, all citizens must be engaged by Parliament. The Speaker's Youth Parliamentary Debates provide for young people across the country to freely express their views on national issues in a formal parliamentary setting. All sittings of the National Assembly are live-streamed, and the public may attend sittings of the National Assembly. The Speaker's suggestion box allows citizens to communicate their concerns directly to him. When bills are committed to the scrutiny of a special select committee, members of the public and subject specialists can make inputs by submitting oral or written commitments to the committee. Guyana's parliament continues to evolve and remains a democratic space committed to the reduction of intolerance and exclusion. As peaceful existence continues to be challenged by intolerance, it is incumbent on all of us to be resolute in creating just legislative models in our parliaments to promote the inclusivity we desire. I thank you.
Thank you for your intervention. Now we give the floor to Serbia. I'm sorry, Kazakhstan. I'm very sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank the Parliament and Government of Bahrain for their hospitality and the IPU for the perfect organization of this assembly. Today's topic is intolerance, which is a persistent problem that has caused discrimination and violence against people based on their religion, ethnicity, gender, social status, or their other identities. This issue is more important than ever in our globalized and interdependent world, and we must develop new approaches to fight and prevent intolerance and discrimination at both the national and global levels. I would like to highlight Kazakhstan's experience in fighting intolerance in multicultural society. Our country is home to about 100 ethnic groups and 18 confessions, and we have developed a unique model to promote tolerance. Back in 1995, we established the Assembly of People of Kazakhstan, which is a constitutional body headed by the president of our country. The status of the Assembly is fixed in our country's constitution and secured by a special law. Its mission is to improve cooperation between state institutions and civil society in the sphere of interethnic relations. The Assembly represents the interest of all ethnic groups in the highest legislative body and has a quota of 5 seats in the Senate filled by members of ethnic groups. This became part of the reform by the President of Kazakhstan, Mr. Tokayev. Laws are an effective instrument for protecting human rights and combating discrimination, but they cannot guarantee and protect human rights on their own. We must promote values of solidarity, tolerance, and mutual respect to create an effective moral ground for coexistence. Education is key in advancing mutual respect and understanding, and we should promote the belief that diversity is a gift to be celebrated. We should also educate the younger generation to be true patriots, open-minded and empathic, as well as respectful and curious about other cultures. Kazakhstan also pays attention to religious concord, and we initiated the Congress of the Leaders of World and Traditional Religions in 2003. It has become a unique platform to discuss important issues related to interreligious dialogue and cooperation. The forum's contribution to the promotion of global dialogue between cultures and religions is widely recognized by the United Nations and other international organizations. Last year, we held the 7th Congress that was devoted to the discussion of the role of religious leaders in the spiritual and social development of mankind in the post-pandemic world. The forum brought together more than 100 delegations from 50 countries, including representatives of different religions, international organizations, and politicians. Among them were His Holiness Pope Francis and Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Sheikh Ahmed At-Taib. So we should use the peacemaking potential of religions to unite the efforts of spiritual authorities in search of long-term stability. In conclusion, our message is clear. Dialogue and mutual support are the only way to efficiently overcome the challenges the world faces today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for the floor. And now I would like to give the word to Serbia. Here we are.
Thank you. Honorable Chairperson, distinguished speakers of Parliament, deputy speakers of Parliament, fellow parliamentarians, dear colleagues and friends, allow me at the very beginning to congratulate the organizers for their remarkable organizations and their hospitality. I highly appreciate the topic of today's debate on promoting peaceful coexistence and tolerance, as well as inclusive societies. The IPU, as the oldest international parliamentary organization, preserves these exact values as its heritage. Respecting these values is a civilizational achievement. Protection and promotion of human rights, peace, dialogue, and peaceful settlement of disputes with respect for international law. The principle of equality is one of the fundamental principles underpinning human rights and freedoms. The fight for human rights will never cease. Unfortunately, intolerance and discrimination still exist in almost all societies. Dear colleagues, let me quote philosopher Karl Popper, who once said, "In order to maintain a tolerant society, society must be intolerant of intolerance." Intolerance is the lack of respect for other people's customs or beliefs, except selfishly for one's own. Fighting intolerance is not simple. Dialogue, education, political readiness are necessary if we want to achieve tangible results. Education, as one of the key and primary means of prevention, is essential for combating intolerance and discrimination. It promotes inclusion and peaceful coexistence. States are obliged to take legal measures to fight discrimination, first of all by creating national normative frameworks that would guarantee equal treatment of all citizens before the law. They are obliged to promote the positive values of mutual understanding and respect for human rights. Dear colleagues, Parliament is the voice of people. It represents all citizens of a country. As parliamentarians, we have a great responsibility to respect the needs of all people, regardless of their gender, age, economic and social status, religious affiliation, and all other differences. We need to take our role in fighting intolerance seriously. It is our duty, as we are the only state institution that is representative of the entire nation. Extensive reforms in the field of non-discrimination are being implemented in Serbia with the aim of harmonizing the legal framework with relevant international and European standards. On the international level, Serbia is a signatory to numerous conventions. We have demonstrated our commitment to respecting and protecting human rights by ratifying 8 out of 9 most important human rights treaties created under the UN. Serbia is an example of good practice as it is the first UN member state to include the principle of leaving no one behind in its legal framework. In addition, the government of Serbia adopted a strategy for prevention and protection against discrimination for the period 2022 to 2030. The National Assembly of the Republic of Serbia has adopted numerous laws to improve these normative measures: the law on gender equality, the law on labor, social protection, criminal code, and many others. Our commitment to protecting the rights of national minorities has always been built into the legal framework in the form of the law on the protection of the rights and freedoms of national minorities, as well as the law on national councils of national minorities. So Serbia really wants to respect all the national minorities, but I'm going to tell you something today that you will probably hear for the first time here at the IPU Assembly. I was born in Kosovo and Metohija. I was born there where 3 months ago a patriarch of Serbian Orthodox Church was preventing to go to a liturgy, although there is a seat of our church there. On Christmas Day, someone was shooting at children just because they are Serbs. You are being beaten if you speak Serbian. And in June, it will be full 23 years. This is how long I have not been able to go back to my home. Someone has decided I do not have the right to go back there. It is our responsibility as parliamentarians to fight for fundamental human rights. And one of the fundamental human rights is that every person can live where they were born. I want to hear that these injustices cannot be made due to the decisions of individuals. We cannot allow elementary human rights of one nation to be violated, a nation that cannot go to its own territory where they have monasteries from the 12th century. My name is Snežana Paunović, and I will be very glad if you could understand how nervous I am when I say that for half of my life, because of someone's decision, I cannot go back to my homeland because they tell me it's no longer mine. Thank you very much.
I'd like to give the floor to the Syrian Arab Republic.
President, I wish to convey the greetings of the President of the Syrian Arab Republic. We wish you every success in your work, and I am very grateful to the Kingdom of Bahrain for the very successful organization of this event. I'm speaking on behalf of all Syrians today. Syrians are very sad, given the bloodshed, given the victims, the heavy toll throughout the country. There are people who have been the victims of natural disasters, and there are other victims of unfortunate events. The Syrian regime is based on peaceful coexistence despite the sociocultural diversity in the country. This cohesion has played an important role in weaving links between the various components of society, despite violence and extremism which prevail in Syria, and despite the fact that there are many attempts to hand Syria over to extremist groups who do not set much store by peaceful coexistence and dialogue. Today, we all face a special choice to be or not to be as Syrians, basically. Following the terrorist war in Syria over the past 12 years, this in fact is a war which has demolished property and nature, and there have been any number of unilateral sanctions that run counter to international law. This has inflicted a collective punishment on the Syrian people. These sanctions concern fuel, food, medicinal drugs, and the Syrian society has been deprived of a dignified existence. This runs counter to the Charter of the United Nations. It runs counter to all customs and traditions. This war, these sanctions, have weakened the ability of the local population to survive. And look at what happened with the earthquake, which inflicted much suffering in Syria. This has prevented us from providing humanitarian care. We don't have the means, we don't have the possibility to help the victims. We suffer from a huge shortage in equipment. Ladies and gentlemen, history doesn't write itself. History is shaped by action taken by governments and institutions. Following this devastating earthquake, we regained a bit of hope because we feel above all that we belong to global humankind. We wish to thank all those who've helped the Syrian people. We wish to thank the states, the governments, both in the Arab states and around the world, the organizations, federations, and parliaments, which have lent a helping hand. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not here just to talk politics. What we expect of the United States is not taking place. In fact, we suffer from Israeli aggression, the idea being to break the will of our people, but we are invincible. Our will is invincible, and we are prepared to preserve the unity of Syria. An American general visited a camp in the north of the country. This was a real provocation in terms of international diplomacy. Airports are being repeatedly attacked together with residential areas. This is an instrumentalization of the situation that currently prevails in Syria. Dear representatives of the people, we are here to urge you to ensure that justice prevails for our people. We parliamentarians at this assembly in Bahrain, we can do something. Please urge countries to lift the sanctions so that we can rebuild our state, of which we are so very proud. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to Capo Verde.
Senhora Presidente,
Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of the member parliaments of the IPU, ladies and gentlemen, to each and every one of you, my salute. My first words are to express the pleasure and honor, together with the delegation accompanying me, to be at this session of the IPU, representing my country and the Parliament of Cape Verde in this beautiful city of Manama, Bahrain, from where I bring friendly greetings and the hope for a more tolerant, more inclusive and more just world. A world where we advocate for peace and seek to preserve our planet, where we recognize our differences, respect each other and promote dialogue. A world where the values of life and human dignity take precedence over the geostrategic interests of the few in order to promote the interests of all. A world of cooperation and complementary between people, peoples and nations. A world where selfish and self-centered behavior will naturally give way to the awareness that we are part of a universal whole and that individual happiness is only lasting if it is within the reach of the collective. In truth, we need and will always need each other for our own realization. No one is self-sufficient enough to do without the contribution of his fellow man. Self-centeredness is the mother of intolerance and discrimination. These, in turn, are the main causes of dissensions, conflicts and wars. This is the way my people and my country think and act, Cape Verde. It is probably the best way to fight the prejudices that prevail in societies and to combat human intolerance. Peaceful coexistence between peoples is only guaranteed if in societies and individuals the awareness of equality emerges, if the recognition of others as subjects of rights is assumed by all, if each nation can freely and peacefully take advantage of all the opportunities provided by its territory, its culture and its cooperation with other nations. It is necessary to strengthen multilateral spaces to discuss world problems, as well as equate their origin and the ways in which they manifest themselves, aiming at global solutions that are accepted and implemented by all. Spaces such as United Nations, the Interparliamentary Union and several others that currently exist and are known to us all, where partnerships, cooperation, free discussion and collective accountability can be respected, protected and safeguarded as fundamental means for constructive dialogue, sincere understanding and the strengthening of multilateral cooperation. Excellencies, it is legitimate for the world powers to political, military, economic and referential leadership in the concert of nations, but they must do so in a peaceful manner, with mutual respect, tolerance and without endangering collective security. Faced with outbreak of armed conflicts, not all of us will have the same responsibilities and capacities for resolution. However, we will all suffer the consequences which in many cases exceed the state's capacity for resilience. Peaceful coexistence among nations and the building of inclusive societies require governments and citizens who promote tolerance, who are flexible and negotiating, but above all, who respect freedom and human dignity and who promote the well-being and development of peoples. Coexistence, cooperation, the regulation of multilateral relations, the affirmation of social awareness and dynamics are fundamental weapons in the fight against intolerance. They are important achievements in human relations, enhancing dialogue, equality, acceptance of difference, and the construction of responsible societies. As parliamentarians, the fact that we all represent populations and know their legitimate aspirations awakens us to the greater and plural responsibilities of bringing our common interests close together, of ensuring global security and of promoting tolerance as a factor of understanding and harmony. This 146th Assembly of the IPU, which is taking place under the happy theme that this debate has just incorporated, should become another space for dialogue, understanding, promotion of peace and sustained progress of the planet, seeking to promote peaceful coexistence in order to develop inclusive societies and finding effective mechanisms to combat intolerance. This is the contribution and the feeling of my country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I would like to give the floor to Peru.
President of the IPU, representatives, when I participated in the 144th IPU Assembly in Madrid, I was a Speaker of the Congress of Peru, and there was a situation in my country at that time which showed the intention of Pedro Castillo's government to close our parliament and set up a dictatorial regime. More than a year after that, we here to show that everything that we suspected then has now been proved. And those events actually took place on the 7th of December 2022 when Castillo announced the dissolution of the parliament and an emergency government. The de facto regime that he wanted to install never came about because the Peruvian army respected the constitution. the judiciary, and a number of other national bodies fell into line. There was no doubt we were facing a coup d'etat. That same day, the plenary of Congress acknowledged what was happening, and the decision of the Congress is in line with the political constitution of Peru. 101 people voted to dismiss the president, so that was widely supported. Despite that, the next day, the extreme left, who'd voted for Castillo, engaged in some other types of behavior to destabilize the country. There were violent protests, invasion of airports, and a number of other acts. These are acts of terrorism that have no justification whatsoever. The Congress proceeded with the steps outlined in the Constitution, and the Vice President took on the role of interim president. That person had been elected on Pedro Castillo's ticket. She had been elected so that if any event made it necessary, she could take on the role of the presidency. A number of people have called for the resignation of the former vice president, but she's legitimately there. I am the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and we rejected the interference that was taking place. We rejected any attempts by other states to interfere in our country and destabilize our democracy. You also need to know that the corruption indices around Castillo led to the intervention of the judiciary. And in February this year, the Congress in Peru approved a report of a particular subcommittee accusing Castillo of crimes involving corruption. Castillo tried to cover this up. We have fought for more than 30 years for our democracy, and we will not allow a dictatorship to come to our country again. This group has illicit external funding and is a representation of the extreme left. You can be quite sure that we will continue defending Peruvian democracy. And I would like to urge this august assembly of the IPU to continue defending democracy and the rule of law in our countries. Without parliaments, there is no democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. And perfect within the time. Now I would like to give the floor to Norway.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, freedom of expression is a human right, and it is a fundamental right because it contributes to the seeking of truth, the promotion of democracy, and the individual's freedom to form opinions. Freedom of expression has a strong position in Norway. In several international rankings, Norway is high on the list. Freedom of the press enjoy strong protection, and the value enjoy great support. It is also protected in the Norwegian Constitution, Article number 100. The Norwegian constitutional protection has one unique feature.
such as a strong protection against prior censorship. In many countries where there is no such constitutional ban, residents experience such prior censorship. Traditionally, the justification for freedom of expression has been used as an argument for the absence of regulation. But when we face with a new digital public arena and the social media involving an overload of information, the spread of disinformation and hate speech, we are challenged. Freedom of expression should offer us practice in tolerance, to tolerate statements that we strongly dislike and respond to them using words instead of repression or violence. On the other hand, freedom of expression needs to be subject to some legal boundaries. Some restrictions on certain statements are necessary to safeguard the freedom of expression for others. It should be safe to express oneself, and there are limits as to what an individual should have to tolerate and be subjected to. In Norway, our Freedom of Expression Commission presented their report to the government last summer. One of their conclusions was the following: more sanctions and prohibitions are not the solution to the challenges. A strong and diverse civil society and a sensibly regulated public sphere continue to be the best guarantee of a solid and genuine freedom of expression. Promoting a healthy culture of expression is equally important as safeguarding the legal protection of freedom of expression. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. I would now like to give the floor to Croatia.
Dear colleagues, dear parliamentarians, we are witnessing an increasing level of intolerance in the world of today. It's a wide-ranging and comprehensive problem that our states, nations, and communities are facing today. Many of these problems have their source in the non-recognition of the rights of national minorities, other languages, and minority cultures. Non-recognition of minority rights can very easily lead to extremism and conflict. It can also be used by other outside factors that pretend to defend minorities and create chaos in other states. The Croatian Parliament established long ago a special committee on human and minority rights that monitors the implementation of policies regarding the national minorities. Currently, our Deputy Prime Minister is a representative of Serb national minority, Anja Šimpraga. These policies have to be in accordance with the Constitution of the Republic that gives our national minorities wide spectrum of political, cultural, linguistic, and educational rights. National minorities have 8 member seats in our parliament, reserved for them in each parliamentary term. In protecting and monitoring of the implementation of the minority rights, Parliament and its members regularly consult with domestic and international bodies, experts, and act upon signed and international documents. They cooperate with scholarly and professional governmental and non-governmental organizations. Minorities have often, as we all know, been used as pretexts for starting conflicts in human history. Examples are all around us now and throughout history. Since the non-inclusion and non-respecting these rights can have serious consequences, our duty as parliamentarians is to ensure their protection in our societies and take away the potential pretext for intervention of any kind through foreign powers. One of the pressing issues, especially in Europe, I would say, is the mistrust in democracy and democratic institutions. Herein lies probably the biggest challenge for parliaments and its members. The problem is the same when it comes to media. We should call upon the already existing documents, such as the United Nations Universal Declaration on Human Rights. Even the IPU has adopted numerous significant documents. Quebec Declaration on Citizenship, Identity, and Linguistic and Cultural Diversity in a Globalized World in 2012 being one of them. Here, I would also like to use the opportunity to commend the efforts of the IPU, who has always promoted values of dialogue between states and encouraged social dialogue from within the states. That is the only way to overcome the difficulties and challenges we are faced with today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I would now like to give the floor to Turkmenistan.
Dear Ms. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, let me thank you for the highly organized work of the Assembly of Interparliamentary Union and for the opportunity to take the floor. Dear friends, Turkmenistan, whose legal status of neutrality has been twice recognized by the United Nations, is guided by the principles of peacefulness through the development of its humanitarian, domestic and foreign policy. In the interest of peace, security and sustainable development, Turkmenistan constantly promotes international initiatives at the level of United Nations. To date, Turkmenistan has acted as the author of 20 adopted resolutions of UN General Assembly. On the basis of the international initiatives of Turkmenistan and with the support of the countries of the world, the United Nations declared 2023 as the International Year of Dialogue as Guarantee of Peace and 2025 the Year of Peace and Trust. Recently, at the 60th plenary session of the 77th session of the UN General Assembly, the resolution called The Role of the UN Regional Center for Preventive Diplomacy for Central Asia was adopted. This is another proof that the state of Turkmenistan is effectively fulfilling its obligation using the legal status of permanent neutrality. Such initiatives are calling parliamentarians to jointly solve the tasks they face in promoting peaceful life in communities of different views and countering through it. Dear colleagues, Turkmenistan is engaged in the implementation of joint projects to build confidence through dialogue and promote fruitful cooperation. Among them, several major regional and international projects, such as Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India gas pipeline, the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan electrical communication gas pipeline, the Lapis Lazuli transport corridor, which will ensure stable development in the region at the international level and will contribute to strengthening security, promote initiatives, implementation, and make the necessary efforts for the implementation. President of Turkmenistan, Serdar Berdimuhamedov, successfully continuing the ambitious initiatives of the national leader of Turkmen people, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, with lozung, "We will build friendship and brotherhood with peoples, nations and countries of the world based on our peace-loving policy." Ladies and gentlemen, as noted, parliaments have an important role to play in promoting peaceful coexistence and diverse communities, as well as in resisting violence. Effective work in this direction is also being carried out in Turkmenistan. Ensuring peace and security in society, strengthening the foundation of people's power and democratic, legal, secular state is a priority of the state policy of Turkmenistan. The Parliament of Turkmenistan, along with other state institutions of the country, effectively used the opportunities of events held at the national, regional and international levels to promote peaceful life in communities with different views, bring the issue of countering threats to general public and improve activities in this area. We would like to emphasize that by joint efforts we are ready to assist in the implementation of the decisions that will be taken on the issues discussed within the framework of this Congress at the national, regional and international levels. Dear participants of the Assembly, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I wish the Assembly participants success in their work to ensure good health, prosperity, peace and sustainable development in the world. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your intervention. I would now give the floor to Lithuania.
President of the Interparliamentary Assembly, Speakers of Parliament, dear colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and discuss topical matters. There is a saying that society is only as strong as its weakest member. Ensuring equal opportunities is the basis of the inclusive society and prevention of intolerance. Equal opportunities constitute one of the key values and principles of modern society. The principle of equality of all people before the law is enshrined in the Constitution of the Republic of Lithuania and in a number of national laws. Each member of Lithuanian society has the same opportunities to pursue education, career and professional improvement and to be active in all areas of political and social life. Beyond doubt, there is still room for improvement. We still face the challenge of gender equality in the power domain. Lithuanian Parliament has 28% of women members, and I believe that this figure can and must be higher. However, we are pleased that the Seimas and the government of Lithuania are headed by women, and not so long ago, a woman served as the president of the Republic of Lithuania for 10 consecutive years. Lithuanian society is homogeneous, as Lithuanians account almost 85% of population. For hundreds of years, Lithuanians have peacefully coexisted with Polish, Ukrainians, Russian, Belarusian, Jewish, and other nationalities. National minorities are an integral part of Lithuanian society and have long-standing historical and cultural ties to Lithuania. For centuries, national communities have played an important role as they contributed on the creation of Lithuania state and the defense of its freedom and independence. Just over a year ago, on 24th February 2022, when Russia launched a brutal war in Ukraine, Lithuania, like other neighboring and European countries, faced a new challenge, a wave of war refugees from Ukraine. These were mostly women, children, and the elderly, left their homes in Ukraine to seek safe refuge from the atrocities of the war. Lithuanians welcomed them with open hearts, and many residents shared their homes with them. In order to continue to build an inclusive and tolerant society and to help Ukrainians fleeing the war, the Seimas has regulated the provision of social assistance to Ukrainian war refugees, enabling them to receive medical care, study in their own language, and find employment. We are here today to discuss the building on exclusive society and fighting intolerance. However, while being here and sharing our experience, we cannot be tolerant of the war in Ukraine, Russia's violation of human rights and freedom, breaking the principles of international order and disregard for the democratic values. For as long as we are tolerant of the atrocities committed by Russia, no amount of legislation passed could smooth out the cracks of our national societies or our own consciousness. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your intervention. I would now give the floor to the Speaker of Iceland.
Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, first I'd like to thank Bahrain for hosting the IPU and doing it so well. And thanks to the IPU and the delegates for providing a forum for MPs from all over the world to debate the big issues that concern us all. But are we debating the issues as much as we should? As parliamentarians, we deal with many things, big and small. Few are as big as the ones we are discussing at this assembly. Peace is probably the biggest issue of all, and hopefully we all believe in the importance of fighting intolerance. But how do we want to achieve success in these fields and others? Do we really believe that free and open debate is the answer? And if so, are we acting accordingly? Sometimes it seems the bigger the issue, the more restrained allowed speech is. We can consider huge issues like the environment and the refugee crisis. If we really believe in the power of free debate, we need to be able to discuss these issues without fear. Is that not the best way to find the best solutions? Or do we secretly believe that we have the answers and need to prevent others from distorting the one true message? A person can be worried about the environment, but have reservations, for example, about wind power as a solution. Someone can be very genuinely concerned about the refugee crisis, but feel that the best way to tackle it is by maintaining control, to prioritize for those that are in most danger. Here I must criticize my own country and the Western countries that like to see themselves as being at the forefront of democratic values such as the freedom of speech and individual liberty. Because in my country and others, we are increasingly curtailing freedom of speech and even thought. These measures are said to be based on noble causes such as fighting so-called hate speech. No one supports hate or hate speech, so why would anyone be against such measures? The problem is that every time an authoritarian regime or a group of extremists say that we must move away from the rule of law, freedom and liberty, they always, not sometimes, but always explain that it is done for the greater good. It is done to protect the vulnerable. When governments gain new powers and tools to control what the citizens can say and think, they tend to change the definitions very quickly. Now we have people being arrested in Western countries for posting cartoons, jokes, or limericks on social media. We need to tackle hate and false information, but might it possibly be best to do that on the basis of education and the good old rule of law? And rather than dividing people into groups, should we not adhere to the principle that every individual must be granted the same rights regardless of any characteristics? Things such as racism, the worst idea in human history, are based on dividing people into groups and treating them differently based not on what they do, but which group they belong to. The best way to achieve inclusive societies and fight intolerance is not by dividing people into groups, it is by valuing every individual equally. We worry about fake news, but I've noticed that sometimes news that was considered fake turned out to be true, and news that was thought to be true turned out to be fake. So what is the solution? Might the solution be a belief in the importance of freedom of speech and democracy? The idea that people are really to be trusted to consider the information and make decisions about how our countries should be run. Do we really believe in free speech? Do we believe that debate and the freedom of people to choose between different options will lead to the best results? In other words, do we really believe in democracy? Or would we like to decide what is right and wrong and then tell people what to say and believe? We as parliamentarians need to mean it when we say that the freedom to say what you think is important. That will mean that we will need to put up with hearing all sorts of opinions we don't like. It will mean that idiots will be allowed to express their often strange opinions. But let's remember that sometimes those who were considered idiots turned out to be right. or as Galileo Galilei puts it, I've never met a man so ignorant that I couldn't learn something from him. We should not believe that we can make the world perfect. To quote Galileo again, it still turns, and it will continue to turn. What we can do is preserve the principles that have served us best and will continue to do so if we continue to fight for them. Finally, I call on the Bahraini authorities to finish this great assembly of parliamentarians by releasing Danish Bahraini citizen Mr. Al-Khajawa, imprisoned since 2011 for using his freedom of expression.
Thank you, dear colleague. I would now give the floor to New Zealand.
Tēnā koutou katoa and greetings from the New Zealand delegation. There's a statement that all of us in this room have uttered at some stage, and it starts like this: I'll always remember where I was when. For everyone in this room, there have been pivotal moments in our country's history involving acts of intolerance and hate that are bolted to our memories. On the 15th of March 2019, a gunman walked up to the entrance of the Al Noor Mosque in Christchurch, where Haji Daud Nabi uttered his last words, saying to the approaching man, "Hello, brother." We lost 51 lives that day to hate and intolerance. Days later, the Imam at Al Noor, Gamal Fuda, spoke in the trenches of extraordinary tragedy. He said, we are broken-hearted, but we are not broken. In so many ways, the Imam's words set the tone for the conversations that were to come. The Royal Commission, the Christchurch Call followed. And what we learned in New Zealand through our experience is that inclusivity is not a destination. It requires a commitment to a conversation in perpetuity, bound in trust and respect. Our former Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, spoke in our Parliament last year about what's responsible for fermenting the flourishing of women's rights in New Zealand. And she said, it is blood, sweat, and electoral reform. Blood and sweat, that's advocacy, a thriving civil society, citizens who have the freedom to not just ask why, but to ask why not. In New Zealand, we were proud in 2020 to share that we'd become the world's gayest parliament, and I believe we overtook our British colleagues. We have put free period products in schools. We have 50% women on our public sector boards. We teach te reo Māori in schools, and we've responded to calls to apologise for long-term wrongs against our Pacific and our Chinese community for historic discrimination. So much of the progress can be credited to the advocacy of our citizens and civil society. Feeling safe, to be present, to be free to actively observe in the room, to challenge and to propose ideas, this is where the genesis of change is born. So blood, sweat, and electoral reform. There's a saying that goes, good leaders are bound by conscience and are liberated by accountability. The crystallisation of convention into code is the cradle of inclusivity. For us, we've stood up legal architecture to legalise same-sex marriage, to ban conversion practices, to decriminalise abortion and create abortion-safe areas. But while 50% of our parliamentarians are women, 2/3 of the women who have ever been parliamentarians in New Zealand are parliamentarians now. These victories are sublime, but many of them are young victories, and it's important to recognise the vulnerability of these victories as we work to protect our progress. But our role in addressing intolerance is not simply local, it's global. I remember where I was when Ukraine was illegally invaded by Russia. I remember where I was when Kabul airport closed. I remember where I was when I learnt of the death in custody of Mahsa Zina Amini. I remember where I was on the 1st of February 2021 when the Tatmadaw deposed the elected Myanmar government. Colleagues, the physicality of your outrage that you felt echoed through to many of us across the globe. Your outrage sits with us too, and in fighting for human rights and inclusion, if we ever reach the point when we have exhausted all possibilities in our fight, remember this: we haven't. Thank you.
Thank you for your intervention, and perfect in the time. Now I would like to give the floor to Equatorial Guinea.
Distinguished parliamentarians, first of all, on behalf of the Parliament of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea, I would like to thank the people and government of Bahrain for their warm welcome and the hospitality extended to our delegation since it arrived in this beautiful country. Congratulations on the perfect organization of our work, which we hope will be crowned with success. We appreciate the decision to choose as the main theme for debate at this 146th Assembly the promotion of peaceful coexistence and inclusive societies, the fight against intolerance. This is a social problem which needs to be analyzed in a different way, in accordance with the conditions and circumstances at a given moment in time, characterized often by insecurity, violence, discrimination, poverty, inequality, corruption, armed conflict, and so on. We need to analyze the main causes, underlying causes, like cultural, economic, and political factors. Peace is not just the absence of conflict. Living in peace consists in accepting differences and being able to listen to others, recognize, respect, and appreciate other people, and live in a peaceful and united manner. It is a positive, dynamic, participatory process which should entail the promotion of dialogue and the search for solutions to conflicts in a spirit of understanding and mutual cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, the Republic of Equatorial Guinea, like other states, intends fully to combat the multiple interrelated forms of discrimination. In many places, one can observe discrimination against refugees, internally displaced people, asylum seekers, repatriated people, stateless. The Republic of Equatorial Guinea, under the leadership of His Excellency Obiang Nguema Massagongo, the head of state, is a country which for decades has welcomed hundreds of thousands of people from all countries, putting an end to discrimination of any type for reasons based on race, sex, language, religion, political opinion, national origin, social origin, economic position, birth, disability, age, or any other circumstance. The idea is to guarantee peaceful coexistence between communities. We can therefore affirm that the Equatorial Guinean society is cohesive, peaceful, and democratic. As speakers of national parliaments, distinguished parliamentarians, the delegation of the Parliament of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea wishes to take this wonderful opportunity to denounce and categorically condemn the resolution of the European Parliament dated 16 February 2023 against the noble people of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea as a result of the insinuations of the Spanish government and other institutions, which have made serious accusations without proof And they have said there have been systematic acts of violence and persecution vis-à-vis political dissidents and activists. The facts denounced in this resolution basically refer to the detention, trial, and subsequent sentencing of various individuals of various nationalities, including some Spanish nationals and Equatorial Guineans who supposedly hold Spanish nationality. They've all been accused of committing or abetting terrorism in the failed coup d'etat against the government of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea on the 24th December 2017. And this resolution, in fact, was sponsored by Spain and France. Ongoing attempts by Spain to upset the internal politics of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea through the European Parliament have led the European Parliament to draft the above-mentioned resolution based on supposed violation of the human rights of Equatorial Guinean mercenaries involved in the above-mentioned criminal acts. In particular, the case of Julio Obama Mofuman, sentenced in ruling number 2023-2552, who subsequently died of certain illnesses. Contrary to the unfounded allegations of torture in the absence of proof by the European Parliament, Mr. Julio Obama Mofuman was suffering from various chronic diseases which were fully diagnosed, as can be seen in the medical report. This unacceptable resolution illustrates a lack of neutrality and objectivity in assessing the internal affairs of the state of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea, and dubious intentions over decades dressed up as attempts to promote democracy. Because of the above, the Parliament of in the domestic affairs of the sovereign people of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would now like to give the floor to Bolivia. You may have the floor.
Gracias. Thank you very much, Madam President. I wish to greet all the citizens representing the entire world. May I convey the greetings of our country. We must speak very openly and frankly. We have, as title of our meeting, the promotion of peaceful coexistence and inclusive societies and fighting intolerance. The first, which we all have to do, is to reject openly war. Not just on various continents. We have seen what was said by Equatorial Guinea. They're forms of war which reproduce colonization in terms of power. We must speak very frankly. We must reject war. That means we have to reject what is happening in Palestine, in Equatorial Guinea, in all continents around the world. We cannot look into the mirror unless we reject certain things. We can't reject certain things and accept others. We can't look at ourselves in the face. War is a mechanism which people think can help to solve conflicts. War undermines the legitimacy of us all. We who have been elected by the people. It's the contrary of democracy. But you also have wars of minor intensity, those which promote coup d'etat, those which promote invasions in order to grab the natural resources of another country. The kind of thing which enables military powers to reproduce colonization of power and take control of nature. Let us speak in a very clear way. Peaceful coexistence was invented to maintain a balance of military powers after the Second World War. And we have to make a qualitative leap forward. Let us speak clearly, because sometimes we're not doing enough to contribute to peace, to contribute to inclusion, and to put a brake on intolerance. We have to be intolerant with those who are intolerant. We cannot put up with democratic regimes which entail racism, colonialization, hatred. We have to be intolerant with the hatred of women. Intolerance must be uprooted. We cannot tolerate intolerance. We represent the legitimacy of our peoples because we've been voted in by our people. Hence, we must, obviously, over and above the working groups of the IPU, we must support peace. We need to propose a special peace committee, a general committee, and a specific committee for each geopolitical area around the world. This is an issue for which we have to find a global solution. Otherwise, there will be no solution. Peace also means fighting for the rights of the earth. Bolivia, very humbly, is bringing forth a further proposal in terms of our fight for peace and the inclusion of the rights of Mother Earth. And we must be very firm in this position. On the 22nd of April next year at the United Nations, sponsored by the IPU, we should hold an assembly on Mother Earth to guarantee its rights and discuss another kind of basis for civilization which will enable us to attain our objective, which is peace, inclusion of Mother Earth and its rights as well, and intolerance for those who are intolerant. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech, sir. I would now like to give the floor to Mexico. You have the floor.
Good morning. And thank you to Bahrain for its hospitality. The theme of this session is related to many challenges: democracy per se, human rights, equality, peace. At this meeting of the IPU, I would like to refer to obstacles in the building of peace in Mexico, which is leading to violence and intolerance. First of all, Mexico has a serious problem of violence. There is a high murder rate. It's become the most violent situation in our history. This lack of security is based on organized crime, which has grown ever stronger. The problem of drug trafficking is multidimensional. Mexico is a country where drugs go through, and other governments condone their consumption. We need the support of all legislators, of all parliamentarians, in order to put a brake on the sale of arms used by drug traffickers, and this accounts for the high murder rate. I'd like to say that violence is not just the result of organized delinquency. There are other factors in our society which spawn this, and here I'm referring to hate speech in Mexico. Every day, the presidential conference is used to attack various societies of civil society. People are attacking political parties, MPs, journalists, the media. These attacks are perpetrated by national networks, and legislators from other countries and continents are also attacked for thinking differently. They are deemed to be risks to the democracy in Mexico. Indeed, we have the right to freedom of expression. This is being attacked. Also, this national space, this presidential conference, is the place where people are trying to divide society. This hate speech also is used to attack people who simply want to achieve their aspirations. Indeed, there is great confrontation daily within the Mexican society as a result. We need to express our concerns and also share our concerns and proposals. I want to live in a society based on peace. I want Mexico to be able to live in peace once again. I want a society which is a true community where people come together. There's a major project being started up in Mexico. It's called the Ambassadors of Peace. The idea is to reinforce security. We're trying to build peace. What are we doing to this end? We are inviting all sectors of society, mothers and fathers, private initiatives, media, churches, locally elected people, civil society. We're asking people to come together and build up peace within households, at work, in churches, within the various communities, using the media. Peace can be built and must be built through the messages conveyed. We need to put an end to this hate speech. We need to talk, on the contrary, about peace. It's indispensable to respect people's rights. We want tolerance and respect to prevail. Just like democracy, there should be a peaceful coexistence with society. We need to put an end to these hate messages which spawn intolerance and endanger freedom. We need dialogue instead of this kind of thing. We opt for life rather than death. What we want is peace and no more wars.
Thank you so much for your intervention. I would now like to give the floor to Guinea. And so you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président de l'Union interparlementaire, Monsieur
President of the IPU, Secretary General of the IPU, Speakers of Parliament, parliamentarians, it is an honour and a real pleasure to speak from this podium on behalf of the Speaker of my institution, my colleagues and my people at this 146th IPU Assembly on a topic that's both important and concerning for our various parliaments. Before I begin my statement, I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to the authorities in the Kingdom of Bahrain on behalf of the Guinean delegation for the warm welcome we've received and congratulate the organisers on the success of the 146th IPU Assembly. Parliamentarians, the peaceful coexistence and tolerance that we're here to discuss are the basis for peace and development for us. Unfortunately, they are seriously jeopardized today by people defending their own interests of an economic, political and social nature. Politics and the economy are often linked when individuals want to further their own ends and hold on to power. Fraudulent elections, coup d'etat, the interference of the West in the domestic affairs of other states, particularly in Africa. In economic terms, selfish exploitation of the wealth of African countries by the West, imposed leaders, and the deterioration of the trade in which African states are involved. In social terms, manipulation of communities through policies, injustice, exclusion, imbalance, difficulties gaining access to basic social services, abuse of social media with all the negative consequences that that brings. Parliamentarians, guests, peaceful coexistence depends on a number of principles, mainly justice. There can be no peaceful coexistence or tolerance without justice. We are keen to achieve that ambition. From this podium, I call upon all the leaders of the world to put human dignity at the heart of their policies and to let go of their personal interests. I'm pleased that this august assembly is discussing this, and that's because this assembly is made up of political players. Finally, I'd like to draw the attention of the parliamentarians here to the fate of sub-Saharan peoples in Tunisia who are facing violence, kidnapping, and other crimes at the hands of the Tunisian authorities. Students, tourists, residents, and even people who are ill and have gone there for treatment are falling victim to those crimes. And I would call upon the Tunisian representatives here to remedy that violence immediately. Finally, I would like to thank the IPU for its tireless efforts to bring parliaments together and contribute to the well-being of the peoples of the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and perfect within the time. Thank you for that. Now it is the time for Burkina Faso. So welcome. I'll give you the floor.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam, heads of delegation, participants, ladies and gentlemen, I thank God for having allowed me to appear before this august assembly and deliver the message of our speaker, Dr. Ousmane Boukouma. In taking the floor here today, it springs to mind that it is 22 years now since my country held the IPU assembly and related meetings in 2001. During that assembly, the attacks of September the 11th, 2001 took place. So that was a very memorable assembly. However, the Africans and we in Burkina Faso could never have imagined at that time that what was occurring so many thousands of kilometers away could, 20 years later, turn into such a serious impact on all our countries. Distinguished representatives and guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor once again to address you from the podium of this 146th IPU Assembly on behalf of our Transitional Assembly in Burkina Faso. I would like, above all, to thank the Interparliamentary Union, its Secretariat, and all the member parliaments for having opened their doors to our Transitional Legislative Assembly in Burkina Faso. Before this meeting of the parliaments of the world, I had the honor of leading a delegation of our national representatives at a meeting that took place on the 9th of February 2023 at the invitation of the Secretary General of the IPU, Martin Chungong, at the IPU's offices in Geneva, Switzerland. That working session enabled the IPU executive to understand how the social and political situation in Burkina Faso was developing in a spirit of dialogue and openness. And we developed an agreement and a roadmap for how the relationship between the IPU and Burkina Faso would unfold, and the reforms that our authorities needed to undertake to return the country to normal constitutional order. Parliamentarians, guests, ladies and gentlemen, that meeting, which was very cordial and based on mutual respect, seemed much more constructive to me than some interparliamentary and international meetings which have decided to exclude us and set us aside. That exclusion is seen by our people as a lack of respect. Many countries whose parliaments are represented here are unfortunately still operating according to that logic. I call upon the representatives of those countries and organizations to mobilize all the resources they can to convince their parliaments and their executives to change course. Guests, ladies and gentlemen, the 146th Assembly of our organization focuses on the topic promoting peaceful coexistence and inclusive societies, fighting intolerance. This refers to many problems that are facing West Africa. My country and its neighbors, Mali and Niger, are facing a painful war that started in 2015 and involves terrorist attacks. These attacks have led to internal displacement and led to a number of children living in the street. So from this podium, I would like to condemn that situation and call upon all states to fight terrorism in all its form. May I ask you to conclude, sir, says the chair. This is a great concern for the countries facing this problem, but it's also a concern for the whole of humanity. I wouldn't like to conclude without thanking our host country for the warm welcome, and all the arrangements that have been made to ensure our comfort here. Long live interparliamentary cooperation, long live the IPU. Thank you very much.
Okay, and I would now like to give the floor to our neighboring country, to the Netherlands.
Salamu alaikum. Goedemorgen. Shalom, bonjour. It's a great honor to stand in front of you here at this amazing conference of parliamentarians. I would like to thank the Bahrainian host for their amazing hospitality. I stand here in front of you as a student of Arabic, as a former human rights diplomat. In the Middle East, I served in Egypt and Syria. I'm a senator from the Netherlands. I'm a feminist who has worked for her whole life for gender equality. I'm also a mother whose daughter's name, Soraya, is from a fantastic professor of anthropology from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. We all share these multi-layers of identity, and we bring those multi-layers into our work as parliamentarians when we serve our people, our citizens. And I would like to share, my dear colleagues, my sincere belief that we can all learn from each other in how we can achieve peaceful coexistence. And for those of you who have some time to spare, I would recommend you to visit Beit el-Quran, the Museum of the Quran here in Manama. I visited on Sunday, and it reminded me of a beautiful sentence in the Holy Quran. And let me cite this sentence, and please apologize for my mistakes in Arabic, but I will try it. Ya ayyuha an-nasun, inna khalaqnukum min dhikrin wa untha, wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qaba'il litta'arafu. And I will, thank you. We can learn from this beautiful ayah in Surah 49:13. O humanity, we created you from male and female and made you into peoples and tribes so that you may get to know one another. So here we are, we're getting to know one another and we're learning from each other how we can make inclusive laws for everybody. But also, how can we peacefully disagree? Because in a real democracy, we will differ on how we achieve solutions for our people, how we end wars, how we create peace, how we create good education, healthcare, access to livable environment. And I would like to thank all the colleagues for sharing their experiences and insights in this debate. My dear colleagues, as politicians, we are serving the people. We have to be aware that we're not always doing it right. It is, as our Danish colleague said, we all have to do our homework when it comes to human rights, tolerance, and inclusion. However tough it sometimes is to look into the mirror and see that we're all making mistakes, as politicians, as human beings. Please allow me to share an experience from the Netherlands, from the Senate. 2 years ago, the Dutch Senate, this is our upper house, decided to investigate the relationship between anti-discrimination legislation and its effects in practice. The Dutch Senate took this inquiry after a child care subsidy scandal in the Netherlands, which proved that government bodies had found to be discriminatory on the basis of ethnicity and racial background. In the report, called Doing Justice, our parliamentarian committee focused on 4 major domains in the field of anti-discrimination law: the labor market, education, social security, and the police, for a thorough understanding of the dynamics of discrimination. We spoke to a wide variety of experts, academics, civil society organizations, and we found that this gap between the law in the books and law in practice is connected to the persistence of what we call organizational and other cultures, an insufficient consideration of our citizens' vulnerability in legislation and policy. And we concluded, and I would like to share this with you as well, that when we are drafting and assessing laws, we should use an assessment framework to include 6 major themes. We need to work on our trust. We need to work on the attention for our citizens' needs. We need to have standardization of language that is accessible. We need to be simple in the way we express our laws, and we need to take responsibility and leadership. And to conclude, we also need clear and effective procedures and complaints procedures. Of course, we have to see how this framework is going to be in practice. We are happy to share this inquiry with you. We have a summary in English. Please come to the Secretary of a delegation. Madam Chair, to conclude, one lesson is that in our democracies, we have to be open to outside criticism from our citizens, from experts, from media, from non-governmental organizations and human rights activists. This can be uncomfortable. We have seen this in the days leading up to this conference. Therefore, on behalf of the Dutch delegation of the Netherlands, we would like to underline the concerns raised in the letter of the 12+ group to the President of the IPU about the fact that the visa for the Human Rights Watch delegation were withdrawn 2 days before the start of this IPU meeting. Human Rights Watch is an organization that defends core IPU values on which we cannot compromise in any way. So, as the Netherlands delegation, we agree with the request of the 12+ group to the President of the IPU to make an official statement clearly denouncing the course of events on behalf of the entire IPU. I thank you.
Thank you so much for your intervention. I would now like to give the floor to Singapore. You have the floor. Welcome.
Madam President, ethnic and religious harmony has been a fundamental objective in the governance of Singapore since our independence in 1965. We have consistently emphasized and celebrated that we are a multiracial, multicultural, and multi-religious society. This is despite the fact that our population is overwhelmingly constituted of one race. We are 74% Chinese, 13% Malay, 9% Indian, and 3% Eurasian and others. Our Constitution enshrines the fundamental principle of meritocracy, that all Singaporeans can progress and be rewarded based on individual merit, and that no one is discriminated on the basis of race, language, or religion. Our Constitution and laws also ensure the protection of minorities. At the highest level, we have, inter alia, provision to ensure that the President comes from a different race over time, a Presidential Council for Minority Rights, and a Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act and an upcoming Maintenance of Racial Harmony Act. However, aside from constitutional devices and laws to take action against divisive behavior, Singapore has also made significant effort to ensure inclusiveness and integration amongst our communities through public housing. 85% of our population lives in public housing, and the ethnic integration policy prescribes that every apartment block, and we have about 12,000 of these blocks, must be made up of roughly the same ratio as the national ethnic ratio. The effect of this is that we have families in every block living from every race in Singapore. So every public housing block is a microcosm of Singapore. Why have we done this? First, we wanted to ensure that all the races of Singapore interact on a daily basis with each other. Our view was that in order for us to build strong relations between our different races, it was important for them to see each other and talk to each other every day. Second, and related to the first point, we wanted to prevent ethnic enclaves, where people of the same ethnic or religious group live together, as this could promote insularity and such groups could become separate. Third, within each neighborhood, we also built religious and community buildings so that the reality of being in a multi-religious, multicultural society is emphasized every day. In every Singapore neighborhood, there are mosques, churches, and Taoist and Buddhist and Hindu temples. And in every Singapore neighborhood, at hawker centers and shopping centers, you will find halal food for our Muslim residents and vegetarian options for Buddhists and Hindus. Fourth, and most importantly, our children and young people go to schools in these neighborhoods so that at the very start of their education, they are interacting with people of different races and religions, and they grow up together. This, of course, was not an easy policy to implement and to maintain. It has been described as an authoritarian policy. Then there have also been issues that have arisen from the policy. For example, some minority-owned apartments have become a little bit more expensive, but there are policies to deal with this. The government has been steadfast in maintaining and, where necessary, modifying this policy at significant effort and cost. But although this is admittedly Singapore's most intrusive social policy, it has turned out to be our greatest strength. Studies have shown that the policy has been extremely successful in promoting racial and religious harmony, fostering understanding amongst our different cultural groups, and preventing segregation. Polls have also shown that our population strongly supports our integration policies. Of course, this model has worked for Singapore, and it may not be transferable to other countries, which have different socio-political characters. But it demonstrates that in order to build inclusivity, promote peaceful coexistence, and to fight intolerance, governments and parliaments must have the political will to enact laws and implement policies that may not be popular with some segments, but that have a real impact on the ground. We can recite United Nations declarations, we can speak of lofty constitutional ideals and aspirations, all of which are important. But as legislators, our distinct role is to translate these goals and aspirations into laws and policies that make a real difference in the lives of our citizens. Upon Singapore's independence, our founding Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, said, "We are going to have a multiracial nation in Singapore. We will set the example. This is not a Malay nation, this is not a Chinese nation, this is not an Indian nation. Everybody will have his place equal, language, religion, and culture." This was the lofty goal set down at the birth of our nation. But it was not merely a highfalutin proclamation. Over the 5 decades of our independence, we have enacted laws and put in place policies to try to achieve this in reality. And to a large extent, we have succeeded, but we continue to be vigilant against divisive forces that can threaten to tear apart the social fabric of our nation. And we continue to evolve our laws and policies to deal with changing circumstances. We do this because we know that our social harmony is hard-bought and that it is fragile. I will now conclude, Madam President. But we continue to work at it in the hope that one day we can create in all our people the natural impulse to say that, well, you may look different from me, you may sound different from me, you may do things differently from me, but despite all these differences, you are yet my sister and you are yet my brother. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, and perfect within the time. Thank you so much. I would now like to give the floor to Myanmar. Here you are. Thank you and welcome.
Honorable Madam President, distinguished IPU officials, distinguished fellow delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Mingalawa, I am Dr. Wimya a democratically elected parliamentarian in 2020 general election of Myanmar. On behalf of the committee representing Pidangsu Hluttaw, that is Myanmar Parliament, and all legitimately elected MPs in Myanmar, I would like to take this opportunity to speak here today and very glad to meet you all in person. Madam President and my colleagues, as you all know, in Myanmar, the military junta seized the power from the democratically elected civilian government on 1st February 2021 because they did not get the election results they expected. The President and cabinet members of the civilian government, including Myanmar's democratic leader Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, were unlawfully arrested and imprisoned. That day was the day when our new parliament will be held. The military dictator blocked us from going to the parliament and threatened to arrest us. However, we are able to convene a virtual parliament via the Zoom application to represent the people according to the people's mandate and remove the military dictatorship. At the first meeting of Union Parliament, the representatives of the union-level parliaments were able to form the CRPH, a committee representing the parliament. We don't have a parliament building. We cannot stay at home because of threats to our lives from the military, and our houses were seized. However, the people of Myanmar are overwhelmingly supporting us as we are trying to perform parliamentary functions using technology from where we are. Holding the electoral mandate of the 2020 general election, we formed the National Unity Government in consultation with the revolutionary forces. Madam President and dear friends, I'm sure you all are aware that unlawful military junta has escalated their inhumane human rights violations and crimes against humanity, and has also neglected every effort of international community, including International Parliamentary Union. As the latest figures of yesterday, 3,124 people have been killed, including one elected member of parliament, and 20,335 people were unlawfully arrested, including over 100 members of parliament. At present, 60,470 are still under unlawful detention. This includes 33 union-level members of parliament and 80 regional members of parliament. In Myanmar, most of the people are facing the most serious human rights violations, such as threats, torture, illegal arrests, arbitrary detentions, and imprisonment, and confiscation and destruction of private properties. Over 1.5 million people have been displaced due to indiscriminate air attacks and targeted arson by the brutal military junta. Dear parliamentarian colleagues, since the continued violations of military junta across the country, the democracy gains in last decade have been lost. Peace, rule of law, and development have been worsening day by day. We don't want military to hold the power back again. Now we are trying to promote peaceful coexistence with all our resistant ethnic organizations and inclusive societies. We have our roadmap to build a federal democratic union. I, on behalf of all elected members of parliament and the people of Myanmar, I would like to seek your continued support on this auspicious day. Please support us by passing resolutions in your respective parliaments that fully recognize the CRPH as the legitimate representative parliament of Myanmar people. Please make practical cooperation between us through parliament-to-parliament engagement to protect democracy and human rights and military dictatorship in Myanmar and the world, and to end the military dictatorship in Myanmar and the world. Please pass resolutions in each of your parliaments urging your government to recognize the National Unity Government as the legitimate government of Burmese people. Please encourage respective governments to help and provide emergency humanitarian assistance to Myanmar people who have been displaced because of the oppressions and brutal killings by the military junta. Please ask ASEAN to implement the ASEAN 5-point consensus to stop the brutal killings by the military junta as soon as possible and to restore democracy in Myanmar. Please join us in bringing to justice the dictatorial military leaders and their accomplices who have committed crimes against humanity, war crimes and human rights violations with impunity for decades to this day. We look forward to furthermore cooperation with you. Thank you, IPU, for all that you stand for and act upon. And thank you, dear friends, for your solidarity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before I give the floor to the East African Legislative Assembly, I would like to invite Mrs. Hastings Williams from Guyana. She's the foreign minister and she's an indigenous leader, and she will take the floor from me. She will do the presidency of the rest of the debate. Thank you for that. And now I give the floor to the East African Legislative Assembly. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you. Thank you so much. Welcome. You have the floor. You have the floor. Here you are.
Thank you. The President of the IPU, our host, the Right Honorable Speaker, Parliament of Bahrain, the Secretary General of the IPU, distinguished speakers and head of delegation, good morning. I'm delighted to be here today to address you all. And I thank the Kingdom of Bahrain for the excellent organization of the 146th IPU Assembly and for making our stay memorable here in Manama. This year, IPU conference is anchored on the theme, promoting peaceful coexistence and inclusive societies, fighting intolerance. The theme is quite timely because it reflects the current issues that are affecting our human population. It further reflects the issues that my parliament, the East African Legislative Assembly, is dealing with as top agenda items. The Treaty for the Establishment of the East African Community recognizes the significant contribution that women make toward progress of socioeconomic transformation, gender equality, the inclusion of people with disabilities, and democracy in all areas of cooperation and good governance. The IALA Election Act further directs partner states to elect members of IALA who represent all shades of opinion, gender, and special interests. The ratio of female to men is 50% to 50%. The community also operates on a gender policy which advocates for women and girls equal rights, combating discrimination practices. The policy has helped us in ensuring the gender equality and empowerment of women are integrated into every aspect of work to eradicate poverty and reduce inequalities. The IALA is made of 7 partner states. We have Burundi, Democratic Republic of Congo, Kenya, Rwanda, South Sudan, United Republic of Tanzania, and Uganda. One of our member states, DRC, is facing conflict. In effort to restore peace, the EAC deployed forces to one of its 7 member states for the first time since 1999, in what has proved to be a good test of ability to respond to violence in the region. Hopefully, DRC will soon recover its peace in his eastern region. In times of conflicts and war, women and children are the most vulnerable and suffer excessively. Those who survive often have to live with the vivid and terrifying images of rape, war, and death for the rest of their lives. Women are also suffer from sexually transmitted diseases, stigmatization, and sometimes unwanted pregnancies, and yet they have to continue providing food, clothing, and housing for their families. This is terrible. Fellow delegates, proliferation of small arms and light weapons is a major cause of instability and insecurity, especially in developing countries. There is need to eradicate illicit flow of weapons that have massively destroyed lives. In some countries, especially in East Africa where I come from, there is serious drought that has affected agricultural productivity. Many people are going to bed hungry as a result. I cannot help but to wonder whether the issues that are affecting my region are not examples of exclusions and an infringement on human rights. I call upon you all to look into the real issues affecting humanity and come up with concrete resolutions that will restore hope to the citizens globally. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Iyala, and you presented on time. Thank you, Madam Previous Chair, for allowing me the opportunity to chair this very important 146th IPU Assembly debate. With that said, I will now call on the ECOWAS Parliament to take the floor, followed by Chad. Followed by Eswatini.
Good morning, Madam President, distinguished colleagues. The ECOWAS Parliament this morning would like to first begin by thanking the loving people of Bahrain for the warm hospitality we've received, our delegation has received since our entry into your beautiful country. The ECOWAS Parliament in 5 minutes would like to speak about some of the issues that we're faced with today that are driving forces for intolerance and exclusion. Some of the reasons we have intolerance and exclusion in our region today is first, religious extremism. Over the years, we've experienced religious extremism in most of our countries, especially using the example of the Boko Haram situation we face with in Nigeria. As you all know, Nigeria happens to be the host of the ECOWAS Parliament and the entire community, and the Boko Haram has been a major issue due to religious extremism. One of the other issues we have is the enduring tradition practice of social placement. Most times we place people into categories that are not befitting of them. Sometimes we believe that women should have a separate role, limited role in our society than the men. Or sometimes the youth should have a limited role than the adults. Those exclusions sometimes bring about political disagreement, which hasn't been helpful for the drive towards working together. Over the years in our region, the ECOWAS Parliament has suffered some military juntas. We've had military takeover in our region. Today we have Guinea, Conakry, we have Mali, and we have Burkina Faso. Some of the reasons for the coup, even though we cannot justify any coup attack, but some of the reasons have been due to exclusion and tempering of constitution. Those reasons have given cause to exclusion, violence, and extremism. The other reason we've looked at in our parliament or in our region is weak state institutions. Weak state institutions allow bad governance and corruption. It fosters corruption in most countries, and as you know, corruption has always served as a driving force to exclusion and problems. Today, we are suffering from hate speeches. Hate speeches and incitement has always served as one of the driving forces why people today are going about with violence, exclusion, because most times people go on Facebook, on the social media, and promote hate speeches that have not been helpful to our community.
Now, what has the ECOWAS Parliament done over the years to work with some of these problems? The ECOWAS Parliament has been very involved with what we call parliamentary diplomacy over the years. Over the years, we've launched our delocalized meetings where we visit member countries, work with the disadvantaged, work with young people and women in how we can foster peace and coexistence between our member states and citizens. The ECOWAS Parliament has a very strong gender force, referred to as ECOFIPA, the ECOWAS female parliamentarians. This strong group of women in the ECOWAS Parliament has worked over the years in not just bringing women and young people together, but bringing all sectors together, all sects together in working towards avoiding exclusion in our society. Today, we want to extend special thanks to two of our member states, Sierra Leone and Senegal, who were able to pass, with the assistance of the leadership of those political leadership of those countries, today have a gender parity bill have been passed in the parliament, and women are now standing firm in those countries as they make political decisions. We also want to take this time, the ECOWAS Parliament, to state that the ECOWAS Parliament has been very involved in monitoring elections in our region. In January and February of this year, the ECOWAS Parliament, working along with the ECOWAS Commission, conducted observation missions for elections in Benin and Nigeria. Later on this year, we will be visiting Guinea-Bissau, Sierra Leone, and Liberia that will be going for legislative and presidential elections. We also have our early warning mechanism. The early warning mechanism in ECOWAS has served our region in fostering peace and averting conflict. I ask you all today to join the ECOWAS Parliament as we use some of your good examples you share here with us today, so that we all together can make our world a better place. There is nothing we can do, nothing positive we can do by excluding others that are meaningful to our society. Thank you very much. It's a nice time being here, and God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eswatini. I will now invite Eswatini to take the floor.
May I kindly express on behalf of the delegation of the Kingdom of Eswatini the gratitude that we have for having been invited to speak in this 146th IPU Assembly. May we also extend our heartfelt appreciation to the King and Government of Bahrain for the reception and hospitality that we have experienced. This 146th IPU General Assembly debate themed Promoting Peaceful Coexistence and Inclusive Societies, Fighting Intolerance, sets the stage for lively debate on the need to vigorously fight intolerance and as a means for the attainment of peaceful coexistence. Winning the fight against intolerance and attaining peaceful coexistence leads to the creation of inclusive societies and the achievement of national peace and security. The fundamentals of fighting intolerance and promoting peaceful coexistence begin in the home setting. They then transcend through societies and eventually are magnified in international cooperation between countries. The speech from the throne delivered by His Majesty King Mswati III during the opening of the final session of the 11th Parliament highlighted the importance of unity and tolerance as essential and key factors in achieving the process of nation building. The King further pointed out that It is God that gives each nation its own unique identity. And through that identity, the nation garners unity and strength to overcome conflict of whatever nature, trials, tribulations that may test its unity. Tolerance and peaceful engagements is key in such situations, as the objective for all is building a good and strong nation. In the kingdom, our customs and traditions seek to ensure the entrenchment of respect, peace, unity within our differences and diversity, and that allows us to lead good livelihoods. It's regrettable, however, to note that globally there still exists severe conflict, which has caused serious destruction to livelihoods of mankind within affected nations and spilling over to nations that are not directly affected. Rejoicing from the suffering of fellow human beings is regrettable. Causing another human being to suffer is criminal. Such actions are amplified when these issues involve sovereign states. No single state should encourage suffering of another, and it's unthinkable that some states would sponsor the suffering of another. Fellow parliamentarians, the theme of this assembly will only bring peace and order to individual countries and to the world if we take it seriously. There should be no interference in other people's matters. We should have respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. In conclusion, the delegation from the Kingdom of Eswatini would like to assure this 146th IPU Assembly that the Parliament of the Kingdom of Eswatini is committed to undertaking all necessary measures, working with all relevant structures and constituents of the Kingdom to achieve harmony, peace, and stability, despite the natural disasters, economic situation experienced. And we urge our fellow parliamentarians here today to note the importance of the theme that we are here to discuss. I thank you.
Thank you, Eswatini, for that presentation. I will now invite Chad to the floor.
Monsieur President of the IPU, Secretary General of the IPU, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, dear parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to address this august assembly and share with you the efforts made by the National Transitional Council of Chad in order to promote peaceful coexistence and inclusive societies by combating intolerance in the country. But before I share this experience with you, may I, ladies and gentlemen, say on behalf of the Chadian delegation that we are very sorry that the President of the Transition Council wishes to send his greetings, but was unable to actually attend because there was a clash of dates. However, I have been requested on his behalf to make the following statement. Dear participants, intolerance is used by people to qualify a lack of respect for beliefs and practices which are different. It entails rejecting any concepts or worldviews which may be different. Intolerance takes different forms and shapes depending on the culture. In the Chadian Republic, the causes of intolerance and exclusion take many shapes. The causes are based on socio-cultural misconceptions. You have the system of government, religious practices, conflicts between different communities, ignorance, injustice, poverty, hate speech. All these are causes of intolerance. We want to achieve a happier future. Chad was shaken for years by political upheavals, extremist behavior. This was the means used for people to make their claims, not to mention the violation of fundamental rights and the restriction of certain liberties and freedoms. For more than 30 years, however, the country has sought to create a tolerant, inclusive society by taking concrete action. The Republic of Chad adopted a constitution in 1970, or 1990 rather, which advocates tolerance and sets out certain principles like peaceful coexistence and an inclusive society. It has ratified international texts on intolerance, discrimination, the promotion of respect, and mutual understanding. Our criminal code has been revised. There are certain attitudes characteristic of exclusion and intolerance which are now deemed to be misdemeanors. We have this legislation, and moreover, Chad has placed special emphasis on interreligious dialogue. It is necessary to raise awareness of the population about different lifestyles. We teach children and young people tolerance, respect for human rights. We have encouraged the creation and the organization of platforms within religious entities which involve religious leaders and messengers. The government of Chad has also set out by decree a special day in November as a day of interreligious prayer. This prayer takes place in the presence of officials, and it groups together all the faiths. The idea being to search for peace, the prevention of religious conflict, and the promotion of interreligious dialogue.
Presentation now, please.
The idea is to promote not just peaceful coexistence and an inclusive society, but also to bring about a tolerant, inclusive world where each individual must respect all others. Unfortunately, the sub-region, the Sahel, where Chad is located, is the focus of a very serious crisis which threatens peaceful coexistence and exacerbates intolerance and exclusion. I therefore would urge all parliamentarians present to show solidarity Efforts must be made to promote stability in the sub-region. We need more engagement and support in order to implement the plan of action in the call of the Sahel. In conclusion, I would like to mention efforts made to combat intolerance and promote peaceful coexistence and build an inclusive society. This calls for a global response on the part of the various players. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Chad. We will now invite the delegation from our observers to take the floor. And the first speaker will be from WHO, World Health Organization. Kindly take the floor.
Madam President, in the words of the Director General of WHO, Dr. Tedros, there cannot be health without peace, and there cannot be peace without health. Around the world, we see a concentration of global crises, leaving an ever-increasing number of people with humanitarian needs and eroding human rights. Honourable members, senators, colleagues, the long-standing collaboration between WHO and the IPU, enhancing parliamentary engagement on health, has never been more critical. Health is both a precondition and an outcome of inclusiveness. It challenges there is discrimination and delivers on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is also a tracer indicator on how successful societies are in efforts to promote peaceful coexistence. WHO supports countries to strengthen health policies, including through the Global Health for Peace initiative, research on sexual and reproductive health and rights, and leadership on the global health security architecture. We address challenges that affect the ability of women, men, and LGBTQI+ people to access quality health services. We also promote diversity within our organization, addressing abuses and challenging unequal gender relations. We harness the power of science to translate the best evidence, innovation, and digital solution. But health for all is a political choice. We know nearly all maternal deaths are preventable, but every 2 minutes a woman dies during pregnancy or childbirth. We know sexual and reproductive health and rights are central to every person's health and well-being, but 270 million women have an unmet need for contraception. We know universal health coverage is essential for a healthier population, but almost 2 billion people face catastrophic or impoverishing health spending. WHO is proud to be further strengthening our collaboration with IPU, recognizing the critical role of parliaments play for health in legislation, government accountability, budgeting, and representing people's needs. WHO will celebrate on 7 April its 75th anniversary, fighting for health for all, and we invite you to celebrate with us. As we move towards the UN high-level meeting on universal health coverage this September, let us renew our shared vision: health for all, rich and poor, able and disabled, young and old, urban and rural, citizen and refugees, everyone, everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, WHO, for that presentation. I will now invite Unite to take the floor, followed by Asian Parliamentary Assembly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Esteemed colleagues and friends, it is an honor to be here at IPU Assembly in the beautiful Kingdom of Bahrain. And I must say that, as was mentioned, I'm representing here today the Unite Parliamentarians Network for Global Health, and we are extremely grateful to the President of IPU, the Honorable Duarte Pacheco from my beautiful country of Portugal, but also to the Executive Committee and to all of you who were at the Assembly in Kigali for approving our permanent observer status. And Unite is committed to working with IPU, using our observer status to bring health for all. We are currently present in nearly 100 countries around the world. We are partners with the World Health Organization, who just spoke. We work in a peer-to-peer manner towards ensuring well-being and health for all citizens around the world. And the truth is, we are living in a time of polycrisis, of intolerance, of extremism, of violence, of violation of human rights, misinformation, and a lack of trust in democracy. And the truth is, health can be a path to solving these challenges. Health is a prerequisite for sustainable development. Health is a building block towards peace. I saw this firsthand working as a volunteer medical doctor in Ukraine during the parliamentary break last summer. And I saw how healthcare workers would treat Ukrainians, but they'd also treat Russians. They treat anyone because the value of human life is above all. And I think we as politicians, as policymakers, need to learn from the healthcare workers from around the world to embrace health as an instrument for peace, capable of overcoming poverty and inequalities. Health can empower those that live in most vulnerable situations and rise the quality of life, well-being, and happiness for all. And if you don't know how to achieve that, there's an IPU WHO handbook outside on universal health coverage. Read it and get the job done in your own country. And as parliamentarians, it is also our obligation to protect citizens we represent. And so we call on governments from around the world, and we call on you as members of parliaments, congresses, and senates to keep your governments accountable when it comes to the negotiations that were initiated by the World Health Assembly towards reaching a pandemic accord. Let me be very clear. The next pandemic will come. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. There are no more excuses for us not to be prepared for the next pandemic. And this time, it's on your watch, it's on my watch, it's on the watch of all parliamentarians around the world to get a pandemic approved at the World Health Assembly next year and to make sure that governments and parliaments around the world ratify it. Esteemed friends, health should be like love. It should be unconditional. And together as MPs, we can make universal health coverage a reality. The people around the world are truly counting on us to achieve this goal. It's time for us to ensure health for all. It's time to unite. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Unite, for that passionate presentation and for staying within your time. I will now invite Asian Parliamentary Assembly to take the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. As-Sayyid al-Raisa al-Mandubul al-Muhtaramun.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, thank you, everyone. I would like to thank the Kingdom of Bahrain, its people, its parliament, and its organizing committee for all the efforts they have put into organizing this assembly.
Diversity and tolerance is the responsibility that to a great extent rests on the shoulder of parliaments and their members in the fight against racism, racial discrimination, and related intolerance. Building the foundations for a more tolerant, inclusive, and respect toward peace, security, and the rule of law are the enduring objectives the parliaments as elected officials are tasked to pursue as core values of every society. To this end, parliaments and their members are duty-bound to use all means available to them to promote peaceful coexistence and constructive cooperation between different communities and to prevent any undesirable discriminatory treatment arising from their belonging to an ethnic, cultural, or religious group in a spirit of tolerance and dialogue. Dear colleagues, Madam Chair, based on this premise, building peace and preventing violent extremism cannot be won with hard power only. We need soft power also. We need to win the battle of ideas through education, through democratic debates, through a better understanding of each other's cultures and religions. Religious, cultural, and ethnic diversity should not make a cause for intolerance. Rather, they should be considered as a base for dialogue and respect within and among civilizations as valuable means of peaceful coexistence and cooperation. This is a vitally important dichotomy that has been recognized and pursued by the Asian Parliamentary Assembly in the context of multicultural dynamism in Asia for making a strong Asian community based on mutual respect and recognition of all Asian cultures and civilizations with due respect to fundamental values of humanity. Dear parliamentarians, on cultural diversity, APA encouraged further promotion of international dialogues and interreligious exchange through Asia. Accordingly, it rejects all manifestations of discrimination that are based on racism, xenophobia, and all other related forms of intolerance. As a result, it appreciates and promotes the benefits of diversity and good governance among Asian nations. I thank you.
Thank you, APA. I will now invite GOPAC to take the floor, which will be followed by the Global Fund. GOPAC, you may now take the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace be upon us all. I am grateful for the opportunity to be here at the 146th Assembly of the Interparliamentary Union in Manama, Bahrain. I feel empowered since just a few days ago, members of our organization, the Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption, gathered to have a dialogue on the UN Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC, an opportunity for us to reassess the progress of the convention and how parliamentarians can help to implement its provisions effectively. One of our particular dialogue topics, entitled Parliament and People Addressing the Emergencies, was strongly related to the IPU Assembly theme today, Peaceful Coexistence and Inclusive Societies. GOPEC's parliamentary dialogue highlighted how we as parliamentarians and Parliament must promote measures towards parliamentary openness and transparency in order for us to have inclusive, participatory, and representative Parliament, a Parliament that is for all. Corruption fuels conflicts. It feeds divisions, political polarity, and even xenophobia. These are evident when we witness favoritism in giving a rule break to some groups while a hard one to the others. When we create a discriminatory law, accidentally or deliberately, to our citizens. When some groups benefit from a corrupt status quo while others, mainly too vulnerable, feel the pain of inefficient public service. GOPAC calls for Parliament as the representative body of all citizens to work towards enhancing its openness and transparency, just as UNCAC Article 13 on participation of society mandated to us to do so. In a larger context, it is high time for us, as Parliament and parliamentarians, to review and assess the state of participation of our society in every part of the public sector governance process. By having equal access and participation for all citizens in every public decision and all public services with no exceptions, we have already one step closer to tackling the divisive community we have today. One of the means to assess such a state would be to ensure the provisions implementation of UNCAC in general and its Article 13 implementations in particular. Moreover, there needs to be collectively agreed norms and guidance to ensure that the participation of society is meaningful. Within that framework, GOPEC calls Parliament and parliamentarians to take part and strengthen their involvement at the conference of the state parties to UNCAC. As an organization with members from different backgrounds, practice different political ideology, and interact at all levels of society, GOPEC will continue to deeply engage at the COP's UNCAC so as to ensure that the Article 13 of participation of society will be critical to promote an inclusive society. Thank you. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullah.
Thank you for your presentation, GOPAC. We have a slight change. I will now invite Onra to take the floor. Onra, you may have the floor, followed by the Global Fund.
Dear parliamentarians, distinguished delegates, first allow me to thank the International Parliamentary Union for the invitation and the Kingdom of Bahrain for their hospitality. It's a pleasure and a privilege to address this assembly on behalf of UNRWA, the United Nations Agency for Palestine Refugees, as we wish to enhance the valued dialogue that we have with parliamentarians worldwide. Created in 1949 by the UN General Assembly, through crises, wars, and pandemics, UNRWA has tirelessly provided support to the Palestine refugees, a community now numbering nearly 6 million throughout the Middle East. UNRWA is a quasi-governmental organization, strong of its direct education to 545,000 children in over 700 schools, 8,000 students in vocational training centers, and a large network of 140 clinics where 2 million refugees receive basic health support. UNRWA provides life-saving humanitarian food, cash, and other assistance to nearly 1.7 million people, and has the largest microfinance program in the Middle East, which has distributed over 29,000 loans last year alone, and created hundreds of thousands of jobs in a region riddled by unemployment. We operate in a region affected by conflict and economic downturns. All our fields of operations are facing some sort of crisis. Gaza, which has suffered numerous conflicts in past years, with an economy constricted by a 15-year-old blockade, and where UNRWA provides life-saving assistance, including food, to 1.2 million people. The West Bank, which is currently undergoing its worst cycle of violence of the last 15 years. Syria, where the war has devastated the peaceful existence of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees, most of whom are currently displaced, while some are returning to the rubbles of their former homes. Not mentioning the latest earthquake, which affected over 50,000 Palestinian refugees. Or Lebanon, where levels of poverty, unemployment, and desperation have reached unprecedented heights. In December 2022, the vast majority of member states of the UN General Assembly voted to extend UNRWA's mandate for another 3 years, demonstrating strong political support for the agency and Palestinian refugees. Unfortunately, however, member states have not followed through with adequate funding, thus putting at risk our services and therefore our ability to implement our mandate. What would happen, I ask, if over 500,000 children through the Middle East would suddenly lose access to education? Or if the most vulnerable, like those affected by the recent earthquake in Syria, the poorest in Gaza, would stop receiving food or cash assistance? Despite these challenges, all of us should be proud of our common accomplishments. We should be proud of an organization which, under your guidance and with your support, has achieved universal infant vaccination, reduced maternal mortality that exceed global standards, gender parity in its school since the 1960s, created hundreds of thousands of jobs, and much more. Throughout its emergency and human development, UNRWA is playing an active role in the economic development and the stability of the Middle East. As I'm now surrounded by so many parliamentarians, I cannot end this address without mentioning UNRWA's own young parliamentarians, who, like you, are elected by their peers. UNRWA school parliaments empower students to enjoy and exercise their rights, uphold human rights values, and contribute positively to their society and community. I encourage you all to visit our fields of operation and meet these brilliant, motivated young parliamentarians. In conclusion, let me say that Palestine refugees are tired of being refugees. They ask for a solution to their plight, and while a solution is being sought, as reiterated in numerous UN resolutions and by world leaders, Palestine refugees need to be supported. And in that, parliamentarians, you in the room, have an important role to play. Thank you.
Thank you, UNRWA, for that presentation. Global Fund, you're now being asked to take the floor.
Good morning, honorable members of Parliament. The Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria is the largest international funder for tuberculosis and malaria and the second largest funder for HIV. We're also the largest multilateral grant funder for health system strengthening, including building stronger laboratory networks, supply chains, surveillance systems, and health data systems. Too often, the people most vulnerable to disease are the same people who don't have access to health care because of criminalization, stigma, and discrimination. HIV is a prominent example. Gay and bisexual men are 28 times more likely to contract HIV than other adult men. UNAIDS reports that 67 countries still criminalize same-sex sexual activity. Often the punishments are extremely harsh, including the death penalty in several countries. In these 67 countries, safely accessing HIV prevention, testing, care, and treatment is often impossible. This continually drives new infections. Similarly, transgender women are 14 times more likely to contract HIV than other adult women, and 20 countries criminalize or otherwise prosecute transgender people. Sex workers and people who inject drugs are also at much higher risk for HIV than the general population. Again, this creates significant barriers that drive new infections. In countries where there's criminalization, we see significantly less progress against HIV, including fewer people who are tested and know their HIV status, and fewer people accessing life-saving treatment. As a result, these criminalized and marginalized groups account for 70% of new HIV infections globally, and 94% of new infections outside of sub-Saharan Africa. Within sub-Saharan Africa, they account for 51% of new infections. While moral debates continue, the data shows that intolerance is preventing the world from ending HIV. While the UNAIDS global target for 2021 was to reduce the number of new HIV infections to 500,000, the actual number for 2021 was 1.5 million new infections, a severe miss. The Global Fund is trying to confront this challenge by requiring all funding requests to include programs that address the severe barriers to accessing health services caused by criminalization, stigma, and discrimination. Programs shown to successfully reduce these barriers include sensitivity training for healthcare workers and law enforcement, legal literacy or know your rights programs for those at risk, and funding for legal services so marginalized people can exercise their rights. Most importantly, our new strategy for 2023 to 2028 commits to providing more community-based and community-led services to ensure outreach, prevention, care, and treatment reaches those in need, and that communities lead monitoring and evaluation to ensure marginalized populations are being reached effectively. Changing the laws, policies, and practices that create barriers to health services requires political will. Parliamentarians are the drivers of political will, and the IPU and parliamentarians across the globe have a major role to play going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Global Fund. We'll now invite the Amazonian Parliament to take the floor, followed by PNND.
Meus cumprimentos, senhora.
Well, Madam Chair, my name is Nelson Trade Filho. I'm a doctor. I'm Senator of the Republic, representing Mato Grosso do Sul in Brazil. It is with great joy that I come to this prestigious plenary to represent the Amazon Parliament, the collegiate that gathers parliamentarians from 8 countries that have Amazonian territory. And I cite them: Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Guyana, Peru, Suriname, and Venezuela. I would like to begin by thanking the Interparliamentary Union for allowing the Amazonian Parliament to be here, and recognized by the work that we've been reactivated collegiate. We work. Its reactivation is the expression of our population in Amazon. And here we are to do our work of diplomacy for our country. It is important that we align the needs of the Amazonic countries to the global agenda. Expanded for all agenda. We have several agendas. There are 20 million people in the Amazon territory. Now, at least 20% of the Brazilian forest has already been destroyed. Unfortunately, they have been destroyed. 20%, I repeat. Brazil, despite of that, is world leader in biodiversity. So how to develop the economy and advance sustainable development while keeping the forest standing? It is then important that we implement public policies within our own parliaments. We have to look for a forest economy, which is a very challenging thing for each of our countries. We also have the challenges of climate change, which will affect everyone, but very severely those who are the poorest and those who have the least resources to support climate change. Our parliamentary role is very important. We need to change the negative narrative we have about the Amazonian territory. We need to preserve the forest standing through a sustainable model. We also want sustainable management of water and fish resources, and we still need to attract investment and industries to our Amazon. We are ready, and we are at your disposal to receive the Interparliamentary Union representatives in our Amazon. And thank you all for listening.
Amazonian Parliament. PNND, could you please take the floor now? Followed by Algeria.
Mrs. Chair, distinguished parliamentarians, dear friends, whenever I speak on behalf of parliamentarians for nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament, I bring with me this peace messenger from Nagasaki, which was brought to me to Switzerland by young people from Nagasaki. Because let us never forget the catastrophic humanitarian and environmental consequences of the nuclear bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, of the nuclear tests in the Pacific, and of Chernobyl and Fukushima. Let us recall that from the ashes of World War II, and in the wake of the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the UN was established with a common vision to end war and with its very first resolution to eliminate all weapons for mass destruction. Today, we are discussing peace inclusion. We highlight from PNND a few international initiatives for such inclusion which you can implement as parliamentarians. First, the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, security. The UN Security Council Resolution 2250 on the role of youth, peace, and security. Second, the IPU PNND Handbook on Disarmament titled Assuring Our Common Future. It includes examples of parliamentary action to implement these important UN resolutions. Third, the handbook Nuclear Disarmament for Religious Leaders and Communities, which I strongly recommend to you. It was published by Religions for Peace in cooperation with PNND and highlights commonalities and cooperations between religious faiths. Fourth, the UN Alliance for Civilization, which was established to explore the roots of polarization. PNND and peace women across the globe, whose board I also represent, stand ready to cooperate with you to build peace and inclusion. But let us be clear, in order to reach peace and inclusion, we must stop the ongoing war race. The money this deadly arms race absorbs is urgently needed for health, climate protection, humanitarian aid, peace promotion, and the fulfillment of the SDGs. Let me conclude. PNND stands for preventing war, including nuclear war. PNND stands for the vision of a world free of nuclear weapons. The UN Summit for the Future must recommend the global elimination of nuclear weapons by 2045, the 100th anniversary of the United Nations. We count on you, distinguished parliamentarians, to join forces for a culture of peace to save mankind and the planet. I thank you.
Thank you very much, PNND. Algeria, please take the floor.
معالي رئيس الاتحاد البرلماني الدولي السيدات والسادة رؤساء
President of the IPU, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like firstly to express my thanks to the Kingdom of Bahrain, where we are celebrating this assembly and undertaking our work. Thank you to Bahrain for the excellent way in which they've prepared this event, and I convey the fraternal greetings of the Speaker of our Parliament and wish everyone at this conference every success. I'd also like to share my deepest condolences to our friends in Syria and Turkey. We are working here to deepen our knowledge of the world and the crises that we face, and it's important for the Interparliamentary Union to have this opportunity that's given here to all parliamentarians to discuss issues as important as the promotion of inclusive societies and peaceful coexistence. That should begin with thinking about how to tackle crises and setting aside differences as we do so. Algeria has suffered from colonialism, and we paid a very high price for that colonization. A number of policies were imposed upon us that were not in line with our interests. We decided to return to a peaceful path of coexistence and giving our citizens a real sense of dignity and the need to participate in an increasingly progressive way to achieve development goals. on the 16th of January, we now have the Day of Peaceful Coexistence, which is based on our experience and the need to resolve conflicts in a peaceful way. In light of all of that, we are convinced that sustainable development is impossible without peaceful coexistence at the international level, and so we're working globally and experience and the need to resolve conflicts in a peaceful way. In light of all of that, we are convinced that sustainable development is impossible without peaceful coexistence at the international level, and so we're working globally and regionally to achieve our objectives. Algeria is one of the most active countries where multilateralism is concerned, particularly in the United Nations and all international bodies, including the IPU. We always seek a renewed and robust partnership. We will continue to support all fair causes around the world as a founding principle of our policies, and as part of that, the President of the Republic is undertaking ever more consistent work to put an end to colonial situations that continue to exist directly or indirectly in the world. That applies particularly to those that exist in our region as an ongoing threat. We feel that we cannot speak about peace without considering the suffering of the Palestinian people at the hands of Israeli occupation. Israel is making increasingly aggressive attempts to annex Palestinian territories. We emphasize the efforts towards peace that were undertaken a few years ago. But we could extend the same comments to all colonial situations. We should all make sure that we shoulder our responsibilities and reduce tensions in conflicts so that we can achieve solutions together. We reiterate the support of Algeria's parliament for the Interparliamentary Union so that it can play a pivotal role in serving our causes and sharing the experience of all the legislation that's been adopted in various countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Algeria. We are now closing the B list of speakers, and we will start the C list, which is the list of second speakers from the delegations. So I invite Japan to take the floor, followed by Canada.
Thank you very much. My name is Miura Yasushi. I'm a member of the House of Councillors of Japan and deputy head of our delegation. Prime Minister Kishida stated in a policy speech in January that Japan will work to create a society in which diversity is respected and all people will find a purpose in life and can fully demonstrate their abilities. To do this, we need to bring to the fore the talents of women and young people and highlight the strengths of local regions. As a member of the ruling coalition, I share Prime Minister's resolve to work hard to create an inclusive economy and social order. I served 3 terms as a member of the Oda City Council before being elected to the Japanese Parliament. I'm keenly aware of the importance of representing local communities and of the fact that I play a vital role of conveying constituencies' view to the government for regional revitalization. For example, I have often mentioned the difficulty of sourcing digital human resources, as well as the necessity to implement budgetary support for municipalities. This led to the establishment of the Digital Agency, which monitors and manages Japan's digital transformation. Utilizing ICT and achieving Japan's proposed integration of cyberspace and physical space in the creation of Society 5.0 will reduce disparities between the wealthy and the poor and promote the formation of an inclusive society, as well as precisely respond to the needs of municipalities throughout Japan. In November 2021, I was appointed Parliamentary Vice Minister of the Ministry of the Internal Affairs and Communications and served in that capacity for about 1 year. I was responsible for managing the Office of Administrative Evaluation, and in that role, I made every effort to identify issues by discussing the problems reported by citizens with consultants whose job is to mediate between government and citizens. This enables people to lead a peaceful and healthy life while tolerating a variety of issues because they are confident that their opinions are being listened to and reflected in policies. I would like to make one more comment about measures to improve our lives, which is the fight against loneliness and isolation, situation that worsened with COVID. Bonding with others lead to activation of social capital, and the Parliament is making every effort to develop appropriate legislation. Now, globalization is reality in a variety of fields, and the world is deeply intertwined. The time has come for Japan to contribute proactively to the formation of an inclusive society that will promote global peace and everlasting happiness for all mankind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Japan. Canada, kindly take the floor. Followed by Italy.
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, fellow parliamentarians and colleagues. I am honored to stand before you today to speak of peaceful coexistence and inclusive societies. As a Canadian senator, I am proud to say that Canada is a safe, welcoming, and inclusive society for those seeking refuge from violence. However, we are not immune to the rise in hate. Inclusivity and peaceful coexistence require governments and citizens alike to put in the required effort. The Senate Committee on Human Rights has been studying Islamophobia in Canada for nearly a year, and the testimony paints a bleak picture of Canada's treatment of Muslim Canadians. I proposed this study as chair of the committee after learning that nearly 5% of Canadians are Muslim, and that more Muslims have been killed in targeted attacks in Canada than any other G7 country. Even more distressing, when compared to other types of hate crimes, incidents targeting Muslim populations are more likely to target women. The committee visited the mosque where the scars from a terrorist attack that killed 6 people and wounded 19 are still fresh. We also heard heartbreaking stories from across the country. We have heard of complete strangers yelling at Muslims to go back home, of young women being harassed and physically assaulted because they wear a hijab. Canadian Muslims are feeling unsafe in their own neighborhoods and mosques. Colleagues, Canada is our home. And I chose to speak of Islamophobia today because I believe it is important to hold up a mirror and reflect on our home's problems to better fix them. We must speak against bigotry and hate. There is now a greater understanding of the challenges the Muslims face and a commitment from Canadians to overcome these challenges. We need to acknowledge our problems to fix them. Today, I ask you, my colleagues, to take a stand with me against the growing tide of hate. It is our responsibility that everyone feels safe within their communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Canada. Italy, I will now invite you to take the floor. Which will be followed by the speaker from Mexico.
Madam Chair, friends, we are all here to debate about a common aspiration, promoting peaceful coexistence. The question is, how do we coexist in a world that goes faster and faster with growing complexities on a global scale? We are all interconnected. We are all entwined. But interconnection doesn't mean coexistence. Interconnection is a fact. Coexistence is a choice. How we turn a fact into a choice. We can do it by restoring our faith in single human beings, by protecting them in their lives, in their beliefs, in their rights. This way, we can overcome inequalities and threats to peace. First right, alphabetization, a key fact to eradicate intolerance. My country, Italy, my government are facing a new wave of migration on these days. Populations are displacing themselves in the Mediterranean Sea at great risk of their lives. Almost 80 people, among them children, drowned last week in our seawater. We are saving lives in our sea. Most times we succeed, sometimes we fail, and it's unbearable. Sometimes we have the feeling like this wave is only a problem for Italy, but it's not. It's a common challenge, and we have to face it as such. All of us dealing with many complexities feel alone in some case. And that's why we are here, members of our national parliaments, and we are demanded specifically to work together to cooperate in these very difficult times and show that our common work, in spite of long procedures, necessary compromises, and sometimes a perceived inefficiency on the part of our peoples, can nonetheless provide solid responses to strategic challenges that expect us today and expect us in the future. So let's broaden IPU, let's broaden its scope, and let's use our extraordinary network to effectively strengthen each other and promote coexistence. Thank you.
Thank you, Italy, for that presentation. Mexico, you may have the floor. Which will be followed by the speaker from Norway.
Distinguished guests, the idea is to promote peaceful coexistence and inclusive societies and to fight intolerance. I just wonder whether we can achieve this if we women have to be present. We have to be present in all processes, political processes, economic processes. We must be present in all these processes in order to improve society. Currently, we are looking at SDGs and we're discussing the promotion of peaceful and inclusive societies. Without the participation of women, we can't achieve this. We have parliaments currently that have never adopted quotas. We have parliaments which are making efforts but don't have women, and there are other parliaments which have gone from quotas to parity, gender equality, and that is the true mission of politics. We have to focus on this and place women and people at the center of policy, because we have to involve all people to achieve sustainability. We women represent 50% of society, And we have the right to participate fully in all and every process. We are also suffering from political violence and digital violence. We must promote inclusive education, but we need to work together, both men and women. We need to work for each other. We require unity, and we need to eliminate patriarchal visions of society in order to move forward on the basis of sustainable equality with a view to a better future and a planet, Earth, which cannot survive without us. Today, Mexico. In Mexico, we have equality. We have equality in all these reforms. We have this reform for gender equality in our parliaments. We're 50% men and 50% women currently. Of course, it was an effort for men, but this is widely accepted now. You have to share power. You have to share power in the economy. You have to share our visions if we are to improve society and make it truly inclusive and put an end to intolerance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mexico.
ありがとうございました、メキシコ。では次、ノルウェー。
Thank you, President. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, IPU have a motto, democracy for everyone. And in order to reach that goal, we have to get rid of the intolerance and discrimination. A democracy is built on tolerance, respect, and equality. But I'm worried. In reality, democracy is under pressure in an increasing number of countries. Today, only a minority of the world's population live in democracies, and the number of authoritarian regimes is on the rise. The freedom of expression is gagged. The free press is disappearing and censorship imposed. NGOs are brought to silence, LGBT people harassed, human rights activists put in jail, and women discriminated. The UN Women's Commission estimated that it will take 300 years before the world achieves gender equality. Men and women of various ethnic backgrounds have marched under the banner of women's rights in Afghanistan and been killed for it. To deprive 50% of the population the right to education is a crime, a violation of human rights and destructive to the future of Afghanistan. The United States Supreme Court ended the constitutional right to abortion. Life has changed dramatically for millions of Americans when it comes to their health care choices. In the year of 2023, there is stronger regulations for women than guns in the United States of America. As many as 22% of Norwegian women have been victims of rape, according to a new report. Half were under 18 when the abuse occurred. Dear colleagues, I might be tempted to say that we are moving backwards in time, but that is not correct. We are moving forward in the wrong direction. When it comes to equality and women's real rights, we are moving in the wrong direction. We have many challenges that must be solved together, and we need every nation's full potential, both men and women. Not so far from this conference center, the Danish Bahraini citizen, Mr. Al-Kawaye, has been imprisoned since 2011. He is sentenced to life imprisonment. Like our colleagues from the Danish Parliament, we call for his release. His imprisonment is in contradiction with the values of the IPU and the theme of this debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Norway. Denmark, I'll invite you to take the floor, followed by Poland.
Honorable members, dear colleagues, thank you, Bahrain, for hosting this event. It's a great honor to me to speak for you today, something I've been looking forward to. I wish to tell you a story about a brave man a story about the world, the life, respect and love for each other. This man, born in Bahrain, found his life in Denmark and became a Danish citizen. He found a good life here and made a choice. He decided that he wanted to fight for the good life of his people in Bahrain, where he came from. He saw that it was possible to fight for democracy, human rights, freedom of speech, freedom of the media, in respect, of course, for other people's lives and traditions. His name is Abdul Hadi al-Kawaya. According to the UN, he was unjustly arrested in 2011 in his peaceful protest for human rights in his mother country, Bahrain. He is still in prison. He is now dying. I ask of all of you, should he not be allowed to go back to his family in Denmark? Should he not be released and find peace and freedom with his family? I ask you, representatives of Bahrain, who are present here today, please send Mr. Al-Kawaya home to his wife and daughter for democracy, for our love and respect for human rights in the world. It would also be an important step towards a better dialogue between us. Thank you.
Thank you, Denmark, for your presentation. I will now invite France to take the floor at this time.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, dear parliamentarians and colleagues, as said yesterday by my colleague and president of our delegation, Frédéric Marchand, the legislative framework can foster an inclusive society. In France, the 2005 law for equality of opportunity reflects fraternity and equality, reinforcing the inclusion of handicapped people, both at school and in companies. The 2020 law on autonomy has created a new branch for the social security system in order to take account of the aging of the population. In another area, the National Assembly will soon be taking up the bill on the Olympic and Paralympic Games in 2024. The next Olympic Games will be the flagship of inclusion. The French Parliament is adopting the legislative framework to a new society. I'd like to mention in particular the rights of women enshrined in a law that dates from 1999. This is used to combat all forms of discrimination based on gender. At the National Assembly, my colleague, Véronique Briotto, who's present here, is chairing this delegation, of which I am a member. Sexist and sexual violence remains a global scourge. You can see this in the horrible figures. In 2021, every day in the world, over 120 women were killed by a close member of the family. We have to bring about real cultural changes and adapt the penal code. Legal recognition of a feminicide is necessary. In terms of recidivism, I feel that psychological and medical care for the perpetrators of violence is crucial. Let us recall that recidivism occurs in 88% of cases and involves the same victim. To combat this scourge, ensuring that the violent spouse stays far from the household, that works well, and that's what we do in France. For several years, I have been active in this area at the National Assembly and also in my electoral borough, together with the courts. The results of the first experiences are very encouraging. In 2020, placing the authors, giving them an electronic bracelet has reduced recidivism. We need to raise awareness of this fact and break the cycle, vicious cycle of violence in order better to protect women and children. Inclusive societies are based on the true will to combat all forms of discrimination and make it possible to achieve peaceful coexistence. I am convinced that national parliaments must more than ever play a major part in a world with great tolerance and growing tension. They have to become inclusive political institutions in order better to take account of the aspirations of our citizens. The idea of promoting an inclusive society is one of the SDGs of the UN for 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much. France, Poland, you may have the floor, which will be followed by Ireland.
Dear Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, referring to the focus of our Assembly, it's crucial to ask ourselves a question. What is peaceful coexistence today? As we already know, that is not just a state of absence of war. By analyzing the last decade, it's fair to say that democratic, peaceful world must be vigilant, as freedom and peace are not given to us once and for all, and economic interest doesn't always go hand in hand with tolerance, respect for others, and peaceful coexistence. An important element for the peaceful coexistence of states is undoubtedly democratic and fair elections. Internally stable states whose governments are guided by the voice of the people. Don't seek confrontation in foreign policy and seek peaceful resolution of potential conflict is the interest of their society. For elections to be fair, which is a guarantee of state stability, not only the transparency of vote counting is needed, but also equal opportunities are disturbed when there is no equal access for all political parties to the public media. It's also difficult to talk about fair elections when the public media are monopolized by the ruling party and their coverage doesn't mean the qualities of objective reporting. A main condition for the stability of states and societies is also the reduction of inequalities in various areas of social, political, and economic life. This includes ensuring equal opportunities for women versus men, helping particular social groups facing different degrees of exclusion, and needing support and involving young people in public discourse. In conclusion, I would like to add that one of the tasks that we, as parliamentarians, can undertake today to combat intolerance is to persistently fight hate speech and misinformation. Efforts should be made to ensure that politicians set a good example for society and don't use hate speech in political dispute. Moreover, they should show more responsibility for what they say, avoid populist statements in political debate, and use only verified information as arguments. In this context, the Interparliamentary Union could adopt a resolution calling on parliamentarians from around the world to actively combat hate speech and disinformation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Poland. Ireland, you may now have the floor.
Díomh is mise Róisín ní Garbhí as Éireann Cúnda an Clár. Is mise ceann na daoine atá an seo ó Comhaontas Glas in Éireann. Hello, my name is Róisín Garvey. That's my native tongue Irish. I'm from Ireland. I am a Green Party senator, and I'll just take a couple of minutes to make a few points. It's an honour to be here today. If we are serious about promoting peaceful coexistence and fighting intolerances, we have a lot of work to do. And if we, the politicians, are serious about this, we absolutely have to put climate and the biodiversity crisis front and centre. If we do this, and only if we do this, we will stop climate refugees being forced to leave their countries. We will have enough food to feed everyone. We will have cleaner air and cleaner water. We will be able to tell our grandchildren, and they will be able to tell theirs, that we listened to the young, the scientists, the small island people of places like the Maldives and Seychelles. If we don't, we face water and resource wars, worse than anything we have ever seen to date. The complete opposite of a peaceful coexistence. If we don't, we will no longer be able to grow food, as we will have killed off all our pollinators. We need our insects, we need our pollinators, or we will not be growing food. We will have much unhealthier people, as we see more and more developing countries following the footsteps of us in the West and spending half their day sitting in SUVs stuck in traffic, choking our cities and towns, contaminating our air, and causing childhood obesity because there's no longer safe places for our children to walk or cycle or play. We give all the space to the big metal boxes. I want to thank Bahrain for signing up to the Paris Agreement and COP26, and even the Crown Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa coming to Scotland. But action speaks louder than words, and us politicians need to talk a lot less and take a lot more action. We met with the Irish company ESB International this morning, who have done great work with the EWA here in Bahrain on a successful PV solar and wind project and on super plans for fast rail. But these are all just tokenism. We have all the solutions we need, actually, and that's the only reason I got into politics, because I've seen all the solutions. But we need to manifest them now. Finally, no matter what we want to achieve as a human race, we will not achieve it without equality for women. We are needed, we are ready, willing and able. We do not want token gestures. We do not want you to just see us. You need to hear us, listen to what we have to say. It is 2023. I implore all men to understand we are not a threat. We are, in fact, the planet's biggest asset. So work with us, please, or step aside. It is either a gender-equal green future or no future we face. Inshallah.
شكرا سيدة رئيسة.
Chair, ladies and gentlemen, guests, it is an honour to take the floor as a young parliamentarian and a member of the Moroccan Parliament, and I am honoured to talk about the topic of this general debate. I would like to share my point of view about the role of youth in peaceful coexistence. I would like to reiterate the importance of the different generations in our societies. You know that religious diversity is very important, and it enables us to establish inclusive societies. We should recognize that human rights should be the inspiration for our work and our collaboration. with our sights fixed on the SDGs. You know that in today's world, many people are aged between 18 and 45, and the majority of those young people are in developing countries. They are at the heart of the challenges we face, particularly on the socio and economic front. They've been affected by the pandemic, and they're affected by climate change, without overlooking collapsing food security and energy security. And of course, we should also bear in mind the dissemination of hate speech and the propagation of conflicts and wars that are battering a number of regions of the world, such as the Middle East, the Sahel, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Balkans. In light of these conflicts and tensions, young people are urged to promote a culture of dialogue, to inject new dynamism into coexistence so that we can establish societies in which peaceful coexistence can flourish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Morocco. We now have young parliamentarians, which will be on the D list, and Ms. Austria is on the floor at the moment, who will be followed by Armenia.
So, dear colleagues, first of all, I want to say thanks to our Bahraini friends who are hosting us here in the historic and very beautiful country. Thank you very much. Yes, promoting peaceful coexistence and inclusive societies, fighting intolerance, what a difficult and wide-ranging topic, but also, of course, a very important one. The issues we face to create inclusive societies are different in every country, and the separation between people is not alike in any two countries. I would like to focus on an issue we are facing in Austria, Europe, the integration of refugees into our society. With more and more tangible climate crisis, more and more people will leave their lands and more conflicts will arise. Hence, we will face more challenges to integrate the affected people who are forced into fleeing and into new societies. The discourse surrounding integration is often one that puts a lot of expectations on refugees. When politicians talk about integration, what they actually mean is assimilation. Refugees should be as invisible as possible. That is not what integration means to me. Integration means to be able to communicate with each other, to work with each other, and to have meaningful social relationships with each other. It does not mean to live alongside each other without noticing each other, but to live together, as we are discussing all the difficult issues here together as well. In Austria, but also in many other European countries, we need to do better in allowing refugees access to the labor market, providing language courses, protecting them from discrimination, but also to allow them to become members of our societies. In order to allow for integration, we must not leave individual countries alone, shouldering the challenges, but to create safe migration routes for refugees living in a few large camps on our European borders, so they can move to places able to provide better living situations. The challenges lying ahead of us are certainly not small, but we have to face them. They will not be solved by Islamophobic, xenophobic rhetoric, but by facing them head-on. Because we do not only face a challenge, but also a chance to create more diverse, more cooperative societies in Europe at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Austria. I will now invite Armenia to take the floor, which will be followed by Australia.
Madam Chair, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, peaceful coexistence is based on mutual respect, mutual non-aggression, equality, and mutual benefit. This theory ceases to exist when you turn your attention to the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh. Dear colleagues, since 12 December 2022, Azerbaijan has been blocking the Lachin corridor, which is the only route connecting Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia, and thus the only lifeline to the rest of the world. As a result of this action, 120,000 Armenian residents of Nagorno-Karabakh are now effectively under siege. The blockade and isolation of thousands of people causes a dire humanitarian situation and creates an existential threat for the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh. The humanitarian crisis in Nagorno-Karabakh is worsening with each passing day. During the severe weather conditions, the people of Nagorno-Karabakh are deprived of vital supply of medicine, food, and fuel from the outside world. Closing the Lachin corridor was not enough for Azerbaijan. From time to time, it also closes the gas pipeline, and also frequent power outages take place. With all this, the government of Azerbaijan pursues one goal: to break the will of the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh to live in their homeland. Moreover, according to the information we have, Baku's plan is as follows: to bring the economic and psychological pressure in Nagorno-Karabakh to a certain culmination point, then to open the corridor for a few days, expecting that the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh will leave their homes en masse, to close the corridor again and then open again for a few days, and so on until the last Armenians leave Nagorno-Karabakh. This is, of course, blatant policy of ethnic cleansing. And I must record that if until now the international community was skeptical regarding our alarms about Azerbaijan's intentions to subject the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh to ethnic cleansing, now we already see that this perception is slowly but steadily growing stronger among the international community. Dear colleagues, I also want to thank the countries and organizations that respond to the situation objectively and impartially, relying on human rights and international obligation of the countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Australia. I will now invite Australia to take the floor, followed by representative of Korea.
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everyone. Kaya Wanju. Hello and welcome. A greeting in Noongar language as I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, the Whadjuk country, as my home base, where I live, care for, and maintain continuing reciprocal relationships with all those who share the land commonly known as Western Australia. Madam President and fellow delegates, I'm honoured to participate in this debate on a matter of great importance to the Australian Parliament and to me personally. As I noted in last year's Assembly, I am the youngest senator in Australia's 47th Parliament and proud to be so. There are more than 3 million young people in Australia, comprising 15% of our population. Australia's youth are fundamentally diverse, and it is that diversity that makes them uniquely placed to inform the government on how to build inclusive societies and fight intolerance. With 1/5 of the world's population made up of people aged 15 to 25, the political inclusion of youth is vital for democracy. Governments that not only work for young people but also with them will be far more effective than deliver a better future for those they represent. Worldwide, young people continue to show they're politically engaged and want to be involved in policy decisions that impact their lives and their futures. It is young people who are most affected by housing instability and affordability. It is young people who are affected by effects of climate change. It is young people who are most exposed to changing workforce conditions and unstable work. The insights of young people can offer are invaluable, and the Australian Parliament is committed to listen. We have committed to establishing an Office for Youth in the Australian Government and will be accountable to the Australian Parliament as well as the new youth engagement model. The model will be co-designed by a youth steering committee made up of diverse and at-risk cohorts, including our First Nations people. Now, in conclusion, by embedding engagement structures that afford young people the opportunity to be heard and make meaningful contributions, it is my hope that Australia will lead the way in inclusivity and fighting intolerance for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Australia. Representative of Korea, you're now on the floor. Followed by Canada.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dear my colleagues, I'm Ye-Jik Kim, a professional representative member of the National Assembly of the Republic of Korea, representing minorities, especially people with disability, as a person with disability myself. Today, I would like to deliver my remarks to garner your support and encourage your action regarding the rules and responsibilities of parliamentarians in creating an inclusive society that upholds everyone's right. Various data and indicators show that intolerance and discrimination are on the rise globally, while peaceful coexistence and tolerance are declining. The internet has become an unrestricted territory where hate speech and discriminatory remarks thrive. Adding to this, the media's pursuit of attention-grabbing content has fueled the propagation of such material without proper scrutiny. Regrettably, some politicians capitalize on this confusion by criticizing and stigmatizing vulnerable groups instead of adopting a balanced stance to mediate the situation. In this context, the role of proportional representative like myself become more crucial, as we are not directly constrained by votes, but parliamentarians who are not free from votes should not neglect and must find solutions to build a society where no one is left behind. Today, the world has made significant economic and technological advancements. While rapid changes have brought some benefits, they have also resulted in discrimination, undermined trust in human rights criteria, and restricted rights, thereby exacerbating social division and widening the gap between the privileged and underprivileged. Additionally, people across the globe are facing hardship, including war, natural disaster, and economic crisis. And it is becoming increasingly challenging to show generosity towards others. In such an atmosphere, the role of parliamentarians who represent the voice of the people public is crucial. It's essential to refrain from misusing vocabulary and expressions, since they can further inflame the hatred, stigmatization, and discrimination of citizens whose intentions are already high. Changing one's attitude towards others to be positive takes a tremendous amount of time and effort, while it's effortless and immediate to hate and despise those who are considered to be different. I understand it is human nature to feel uncomfortable sharing society's limited resources with vulnerable groups, as the laws of jungles reminds us. But we must go on with education and self-examination to find a solution. Isn't it what sets us apart from wild animals? The rules of a National Assembly and its members as an independent...
Can you please conclude your presentation?
Yeah. An independent constitutional body must be emphasized in such unfortunate situations with our collective efforts. I look forward to a day when we can create a real inclusive world where everyone's rights are respected. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Representative of Korea. Canada, you may have the floor, followed by Denmark.
Chers parlementaires et collègues.
Colleagues, parliamentarians, we know that members of ethnic, linguistic and religious groups are victims of discrimination and exclusion, and the consequences of that are exacerbated by intergenerational injustices. There are some very alarming data. According to the UN, 20% of people on the earth have suffered from discrimination, and young people have a positive and important role to play in that because they've taken initiatives to attack these injustices by pooling their strengths across the world to promote peace and inclusion. Therefore, the theme of this general debate, promoting peaceful coexistence in inclusive societies, fighting intolerance, is very relevant. Young people are on the front line in the fight against intolerance, particularly in global movements to protest against injustice. However, young people often come up against obstacles that prevent them from really participating in public life. They are often the subject of intolerance, and they often have to deal with hindrances concerning their studies and other aspects of their lives. So we, as parliamentarians of all ages, need to help them so that they can contribute fully to society by strengthening institutions, by adopting equal laws that protect the fundamental rights of everybody, and to fight against rising intolerance, as well as ensuring that the dynamism and participation of women and young people is effective at all levels, and that really characterizes our decision-making processes, because all around the world there's increasing xenophobia, racism and fanaticism that feeds into intolerance and prevents peaceful coexistence. Social media and other communication channels are exploited to bolster intolerance, and that really targets women and children above all others. Sexist language is omnipresent, and during the COVID-19 pandemic, gender-based violence became worse. Let's take action for solidarity. The increase in extremism and climate change are getting worse, and the situation in refugee camps and among other vulnerable groups is also being exacerbated. We need to act in solidarity with humanity, to celebrate diversity, and as a female parliamentarian, and with a young female child, I would like to hand to her a fairer world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Canada. I'll now invite Denmark to take the floor, followed by Ireland.
Dear President, fellow parliamentarians, it is an honor for me to stand here, and it is a unique opportunity to engage with colleagues from all over the world.
I was elected to the Danish Parliament for the first time 4 months ago. Before the election, I was a school teacher teaching 13 to 15-year-old kids. These kids were full of optimism and confidence in the future. We spoke a lot about dialogue, the importance of mutual understanding, and the right to disagree. Talking to each other and expressing our points of views are basic conditions in every democracy. If we are not able to speak with each other, it really looks difficult. We, parliamentarians, have an obligation to show our young citizens that they can express their own opinions without risking imprisonment or other kinds of punishments. Not so far away from this conference center, the Danish Bahraini citizen, Mr. Al-Kavadia, has been imprisoned since 2011. He is sentenced to life imprisonment. The UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has concluded that his arrest was arbitrary, and as it resulted from his right to fundamental freedoms of expression and peaceful assembly. The Danish IPU delegation called for his release. Unfortunately, Mr. Al-Kavadia is not the only human rights defender who is imprisoned for exercising their fundamental freedoms. Such incidents undermine hope and optimism among the young generation. Dialogue is sometimes difficult, but it is vital for our democracies. Here at the IPU, I speak as a young parliamentarian. However, back home, my students sometimes found that I was old-fashioned on certain issues, for instance, when it comes to communication on social media. I think a lot about their future, and I want to show them that their old teacher, in fact, has understood the message from the young generation. If we are going to live together in peaceful coexistence, and we have to, then dialogue is one of the most important tools to help us moving in the right direction. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Denmark. Ireland, you have the floor, followed by UK.
Accordia is more an honor atá armava os vorgornu or son winter na Héireann. Good afternoon, friends. With war raging in Ukraine and many other countries around the globe, it is more important than ever that we gather to discuss the role of inclusive and tolerant societies in promoting peaceful coexistences. Conflict and war destroys lives and devastates generations. Inclusive, tolerant societies are the route to stability and peace. Equality in reproductive health, including access without discrimination to affordable, quality contraception, including emergency contraception and abortion services, and the right to decide the number and spacing of children all play a key role in the inequality for women. Children should not be forced to marry, and girls need to be afforded the same access to education as boys. Women need to be economically empowered, and a zero-tolerance approach to gender-based violence needs to be adopted if equality is to be achieved. As members of parliaments worldwide, we need to commit to these goals today. Due to the power dynamics of gender, conflict has a different effect on women, girls, boys, and men. We are currently hearing of rape being used as a weapon of war in Ukraine. We know the devastating effect rape as a weapon of war had in Rwanda, the last host country of the IPU Assembly. This is reflected in many other countries globally also. Women in war zones need to have access to emergency contraception and abortion services to mitigate against the harmful effects of this brutal war tactic. Diverse, inclusive and gender-balanced parliaments and local government assemblies give women a seat at the decision-making table. The importance of involving women in peace talks and peace building can never be underestimated. We in Ireland will shortly celebrate the 25th anniversary of the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, which brought peace to our island. The role that the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition played in peace talks and the post-conflict peace building was immeasurable. Women had a seat at the table 25 years ago and continue to have a seat at the table in communities right across the island of Ireland as we travel along the road of reconciliation and towards a new Ireland. Thank you very much, Accordia.
Thank you, Ireland. UK, you may take the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be speaking to you today as the delegate of the United Kingdom, but also as the newly elected President of the Forum of Young Parliamentarians here at the IPU. I want to start with a remarkable fact. 52%, a majority of the world's population, is now under 30 years of age. And when we look at legislators, our parliamentarians, only 2.6% come under 30. Sustainable Development Goal 6 obliges us to leave no one behind. That means making young people full stakeholders in political decision-making. But instead, today, they face exclusion in every one of our communities and in all walks of life. No wonder they want a different kind of society than the one they've been told to accept. And what if we listened to young people? Well, they want a society that responds to the climate catastrophe so that so many of the countries here that are already enduring that impact, things will get better. And they want a society that rejects the wars and conflicts of dictators and ideologies, that destroys people's homes and livelihoods, and that tosses away human life. Just as we have seen in Europe with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And young people call for a society that affords each one of us autonomy over our own lives, where a person has the freedom to determine who they are, who they love, who they marry, if they marry at all, and the education and the career that they pursue. So as the President of the Forum of Young Parliamentarians here at the IPU, I commit to being an ally to young people fighting to have their voices heard. And inside the IPU, I want to see some change too, so that we can lower the age of what counts as young to people in their 30s and their 20s, and to find new ways to get legislators in their 20s and younger to our assemblies speaking to us here. And I want to see us challenge parliaments to scrap age limits that exclude young people standing for election, because that's what no decision about us without us means. Everywhere we turn, no matter the attempts at oppression, young people are uniting to make sure their voices are heard. And so as the head of Young Parliamentarians here at the IPU, let me say they have my support and solidarity every step of the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, UK, and congratulations on your election as the President of the Forum of Young Parliamentarians. Before we close this session, we have one speaker remaining from List C, and I will now invite him to take the floor. Guyana, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Honorable delegates, colleagues, I first want to congratulate all of the progressive parliaments and governments globally for your drive to ensuring that you live in an inclusive society. And I stand before you as testament to one of those small democracies. I am an indigenous person from Guyana, which is a visible minority in the country. I'm also the Deputy Speaker of the Parliament of Guyana, a first in the country's history. And the Honorable Presiding President over this session is also an indigenous person. All of us, at least both of us, from the opposition parties in Parliament. I represent 3 political parties within 1 seat. And I think that in itself is testament to and inclusive democracy that is birthed out of a very tolerant society. Our Constitution encapsulates the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, and it is provided for in the provisional articles of the Constitution. Our Constitution also is one of the more progressive constitutions in our side of the hemisphere. The country in itself has enacted a law called the Armenian Act, which is also a very progressive piece of legislation that governs indigenous peoples in the country. These are all testament to the political will of nations when they set their minds to a goal. I've listened over the course of our presence here to countries speak about inclusion, tolerance, and a variety of things. And despite being a very young democracy, I would say that Guyana is well on its way. And I would encourage all of you, I want to congratulate New Zealand for being such a progressive society, amongst a variety of you. And I want to implore all of you who have not yet taken some of these bold steps to muster that political will to ensure that your societies become more tolerant and inclusive. Madam President, I thank you.
Thank you, Guyana, for your presentation. At this point, we have received 2 requests for a right of reply, one from Bahrain and the other from Spain. Bahrain, you will now take the floor. 2 minutes, please, from